Chris, guess what? Another,
What?
another, I know we're here again.
We are here again.
That's right.
And honestly, after the last time we talked on the first,
Yes.
I was kind of surprised. We talked for a couple hours, and I come out of that and I get faced with all that bad news that happened on the first.
Yeah. What's the bad
Yeah.
news?
Well, remember there was the New Orleans incident, and then there was
Oh
the
my
fire
gosh.
trunk in Vegas. I mean, now it seems old. It's only a week and a half ago, but I mean, we came out of that meeting and out of our conversation. I'm like, what happened to the world while we were talking?
I know. Yeah. And then there's the fires and this. I mean, one of my New Year's resolutions is basically just not look at the news as much as I can, but I still am like a drug addict. I still
You
gotta
know,
look at it.
because the fires are in LA, I've been watching the news, but one of my pet peeves got triggered today watching the news, and so
Oh, hey, let's talk about. Remember, we said we are going to talk about pet peeves. Why don't we start with some pet peeves of yours?
well, I'm going to start with this one because it
Okay.
really annoys me. And
Yeah.
the general viewpoint is that the news has gotten too touchy feely. All right,
Okay.
is generally what it is. But so we got the fires here in LA, big problems, and then it came to light that the budget for the LA Fire Department was cut by 17 million, and the mayor approved that, and
Yeah.
so basically the news reporter was talking to the fire chief, and they're getting them to explain what's going on, blah 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 blah, and then they asked, well, the mayor said that those cuts did had no impact on services, and then the person's giving them the nice political or safe answer, right? Not non-political answer. And the reporter wouldn't give up. 7 times in a row, I counted because I was getting upset. She kept asking, because, well, how did that make you feel? The mayor said it didn't impact services. How did that make it? And I'm like, just shut the F up already. You're just trying to sow division and upset. I get at some point they should look into this and all of that. But in the middle of the fire with people dying and houses burning, I think the focus should be on that, not on whether or not they cut the budget. So I was getting really irked. And the question was, how does that make you feel?
Yeah.
And I'm like, the fire chief in my mind should have responded, what the hell do my feelings have to do with any of it? We've got houses burning, we've got people dying, and I need help to get this done. Why are you asking me how I feel?
Yeah.
Feelings aren't going to fix this problem.
Yeah.
Hard work, getting your ass out there, getting people to come and help us as needed, that's what's going to make a difference.
Yeah.
Oh, so one of my pet peeves is when the news just keeps going on emotion and keeps trying to trigger, dissent and argument. And I'm like, dude, you
But
know,
that's their thing. That's what they do.
that isn't always what they did.
That's how
That's
they
what they
roll.
do
Well,
now.
yeah, that what they did and what they do now are two different things, actually. I mean, you got to remember, it's a very simple formula. News is a for-profit business, and the
Yes.
model is you get your people riled up and you sell a bunch of advertising. That's it.
Well, I don't call that news. I call that entertainment. It's a
Of
different kind of
course, of
entertainment.
course. Yeah, it's very difficult to get actual news.
I still believe that news was this thing that happened on, on the radio and then on TV, and you had those Dan Rathers and those kinds of guys, who did the news. And I'm sure it had
Well,
bias as well, but it was better presented.
yeah, of course, actually. That doesn't sell as well, unfortunately. So,
I think Dan Rather was would shoot down news stories that got too much into, you know, relationships and things like that because he thought that wasn't the news.
yeah,
And
yeah.
he was like maybe the last main newscaster that had that kind of authority to be able to keep the news from going that way.
Well, so okay, since you brought up fires, let's talk about fires. And so I've watched quite a bit, more than I should have actually. And it sort of goes and I'm grossly oversimplifying, right? So just give me a little bit of rope uh, to,
Okay.
to hang myself with. It seems to be, as everything is, it turns into some political thing, right? I mean, it's just a dog can't go to the bathroom without it being like Republican or Democrat somehow, right? It's just silly. Um, in my way, I've got sort of two sides, right? One side on the left typically is the wind's blowing too hard, it's climate change, and that's the whole problem, right? And on the other side, it's you cut the budget and you're diverting water, and when you turn the fountain on there's no water coming out. So just allow me to simplify with those. I'm sure there's a little more nuanced detail than that, but that seems to be the big talking points that I keep seeing over and over again. So
So the wind blowing is like we couldn't have done anything about it is the argument because it's nature. And
yeah,
then the other argument is you could have done something about it if you didn't waste or if you weren't so bad at managing whatever, right? And since
yeah,
in California it's the Democrats in power, then if you mismanage it, it's the Democrats' fault.
yeah,
And the defense against that is, well, nature just did its thing, which I've got caveats galore for all of this stuff.
yeah,
Because both of those things are true and both of them are also wrong.
yeah. So this is good you brought that up, actually. So since we have a show on critical thinking, like how would you approach this problem if you see contradictory stuff on the news? I mean, the thing we can agree on is that there's fire and houses are burning down and people are dying. I think everybody can agree on that, right? And then so what are we going to do about it? So if you were a totally rational person, like how would you go around interpreting this data that's coming in, both coming in on the left and the right?
So just before we started the call, I wrote down a couple things because I know we talk about critical thinking, and I've been thinking in the last few days. It's more about what I consider common sense,
Okay, common
which
sense, yeah.
it's hard to define, but I think common sense is removing and separating the feelings.
Yes,
It's having a certain amount of general knowledge around the world, just general knowledge around the world.
yes,
It's the ability to do the critical thinking, to ask questions, and then having a certain level of skepticism as to how things are being presented to you.
yeah,
I think those four things in combination are which empower you to be able to truly question something and come to a balanced or centered idea on it. So when I think about that, I'm like, well, all the reporting is feelings. Oh, these houses burned down. Oh, let's interview this little 5-year-old kid who lost all his Christmas presents in the fire. I mean, those are all those are trying to go for a story, and we know stories sell,
yeah, of
but
course.
we don't want stories here. Stories are anecdotes. Anecdotes aren't going to tell us what's going on.
Yeah,
So we need to understand. The first thing I need to look at is, wow, fires in Southern California. Is that a surprise?
yeah, not a
No.
surprise.
Happens every year this time of year.
Yeah,
Well, strong dry winds. That happens every year this time of year.
yes,
Maybe it's stronger than normal. Yes, it was a really strong windstorm,
yeah,
but we get them every year.
yeah,
So that in and of itself means that there's some level of adaptability that the government, the society could have done to try to alleviate some of this,
yes,
right? And now your question is, well, did they do nothing? Because that's unlikely. It's been going on for years. They probably did some of that. Then you start saying, well, did they not do enough? And that starts to then now we're getting to the side where that you're attacking the organization
yeah,
for not doing enough or not spending enough, whatever. And
right.
you say, is there validity in that? Well, okay, so they're saying that the LA budget was cut by $17 million. Since I have no idea what the original budget was,
Yeah,
I don't know if it's a lot or not. If their original budget was 200 million, that's a 10% cut. If
yeah,
their original budget was 20 million, that's an 85% cut, right? So
right.
knowing I don't know that. So
Yeah,
hearing them say it was cut by X doesn't tell me anything
yeah,
aside from that they did a cut. So they
yeah,
want me to make a judgment call without understanding the impact.
yeah,
And understanding the impact is a big part of it, right?
yeah,
So all those things kind of need to go through my mind. And if you're not asking those questions, then you're not putting yourself in a position to be able to reasonably come to a conclusion that isn't being fed to you, right?
yeah,
They're feeding you one side or they're feeding you the other. And if you're trying to come up with something in the middle that seems realistic, you need to be asking those kinds of questions.
yeah. Yeah, that I think that's right because one of the things that I was thinking about, and you have to admit this, is that every single one of us has some sort of bias. So I
Mhm.
think a better question would be is not am I biased? Like, yes, of course you're biased. How biased are you? And in which direction does the bias work, right? So I've been thinking about this a lot. And I've been thinking that I still am got my teeth into this concept that, logic is kind of the framework that truth is constructed upon. But I'm like, is that how right is that? Is that like 100% right? Is it not? I mean, could that send me the wrong way in certain cases? So,
Yeah, well, I would fix your wording in one way. Logic is one of the best frameworks because I
okay,
think there are frameworks that are emotional, frameworks that are, that are driven by other goals and principles. So
yes,
Yeah, and so if you say logic is the framework, that implies there's no other framework. And I think we're saying it is the best or the better or the best we can come up with or the
that we
most
know
standard,
of right now.
something that we can, or it's the best for moving the conversation along.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if that's true, right? And I think we've got a lot of data from probably a couple thousand years indicate that logic is the best way of thinking that we have right now. Then I would think that we'd probably want to get good at building logical frameworks to help us think about things rapidly. Probably poised in questions, right?
Yep. I mean, questions are the most powerful way because it's not just asking the question, it's framing the question in the first place,
Yeah,
right? If you ask a question in a certain way with certain assumptions built in, what's the old one? Goes, when did you stop beating your wife?
yeah, exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
there's a bias there that means at some point at least you beat your wife, right? And so that's a question that's starting with an assumption that you have to go back and look at that. So being able to ask a question that's more fundamental, I guess,
Yeah.
you know, is the way that you would bring that up.
So what would that be? What would be the fundamental question? It's like if I want to improve my thinking and I see something, is there a series of questions that I could go through that might lead me closer to the truth? Because then what the heck's the truth, right? I mean, the truth is, yeah, that's who knows what the truth even is, actually.
Well, we can go on to that in a separate topic, but I think the questions that you should start asking are, is what I'm hearing accurate?
Yeah,
Is it factually accurate?
yeah.
First thing. And then the follow-up question is, if it is factually accurate, what does it mean?
What does it mean?
So if
Yes.
someone says someone cut the budget by $18 million,
Yeah,
and again, that goes back to my thing is, what does that mean? Does that mean that they've had to fire 90% of the staff, or does that mean they had to fire 5% of the staff? Right?
yeah,
We have no sense of impact. Right?
yeah.
I don't know if when you study risk management,
Hmm.
you study the likelihood of something happening and then
Yeah,
the impact of it happening,
yeah, right.
and you give things ratings based upon the likelihood and the impact. Right? The
Yeah,
idea of an earthquake wiping out your business and leaving a smoking hole behind,
yeah,
that's very low chance of it happening,
yeah.
but if it happened, it's a very high impact.
Yes,
So you
right.
need to make an assessment. How much insurance, how much money are you going to spend to on that chance
Yeah,
versus the chance of any earthquake happening causing some damage to your business, but not enough to put you out of business? That's probably much more likely. And again, the impact's a lot less. So when you're hearing information, you have to understand, is that factually accurate, number one, or and then what is the impact? And the more you understand of the world, the wider your base of knowledge, the better you can do that without having to do research, right? If you know a lot of things about a lot of things, you can deduce what the likelihood of something being right or wrong is, and you can also deduce what the likelihood of an impact of that is. That's
funny.
one of the main things I think. Having being a well-read person used to be an important thing because you had a wide base of knowledge to draw on.
Yeah,
I think the more we specialize and you have to rely on other people, the less you're able to do that, except
yeah,
within your field, which you might be really good at doing that.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. And I think maybe even before the questions, maybe the start of this for myself and others is if you feel yourself getting emotional, maybe just pump the brakes on that. You're like, wait a minute, just hang on, because I very likely could go to a bad decision, right?
What you could also, when you start to feel something, you stop and say, "What do I know about this?"
Yeah,
Right? And if you come out saying, "I don't know anything about this,"
yeah,
or if you're actually self-aware enough to go, "Everything I know came from the left, the
yeah,
right, social media, TikTok, the radio, whatever. It came from this conservative news person versus this
yeah,
liberal news person." That might actually give you a sense of, oh, okay, so I automatically know that the information I have might be biased.
Not might be, definitely is biased.
I got to give everyone some credit, you know.
It's just, I think the better question would be, well, how biased is it, right? I kind of
Yeah.
like thinking in terms of probability, because the chance of anybody being 0% biased is pretty much, in my opinion, zero. Everybody has some biases, and I think that's okay as long as you're aware of what your biases are.
So this is why whenever someone's trying to trigger a response and they say, goes, "Are you a racist? Are you prejudiced? Are you biased? Are you?" Yes, everyone is. Yeah,
Everyone is,
right.
yes.
But I think we mix the words up. We think that bias and prejudice mean racist and discriminatory.
Hmm.
I have a bias for things that I like and things that I don't like.
Yes, right.
I
Yeah.
also have a I have a bias for ukuleles over guitars because I
Yes.
can play them and they're small and they're portable,
Yes.
right? Does that mean I'm racist? And I can't use that, I guess. Instrumentalist? I don't know. Against one instrument? Well, yeah, I am. And it also means I discriminate in my purchasing power where I
Yes.
spend my money on that. So,
Yes.
using those terms, we need to understand as soon as you apply that to a person or people or whatever, or culture, we get screwed up. And I think you need to understand bias and prejudice and stereotyping are the way the human mind works.
Yes. Yes.
If I
Yes.
think about this, if you only ever met one Chinese person in your life,
Yeah.
actually, let's go with the Japanese person in your life,
Yeah.
and let's say they were the 70s stereotype. They had the business suit, they had a camera, they wore glasses, and they had, and that's what you saw.
Yeah.
Then really that's the only evidence you have of what a Japanese person looks like.
Yes.
When
Right.
someone else talks about Japanese people, that's the image that comes up in your mind,
Correct. Yeah.
right? Then you meet some Japanese guy who's a surfer, who has long hair, who's tanned, and it's like, oh, he's Japanese too.
Yeah.
And suddenly your stereotype now has to expand or change to adapt to allow for these two different things.
Yeah.
That's why knowledge and understanding and seeing the world is important to get rid of limiting stereotypes.
Yeah.
Because those stereotypes then go into a prejudice. This is the way someone is, and then from the prejudice comes into discrimination. And
Yeah.
this is the way I must act because of that.
Yeah.
And racism, we use it for any kind of discrimination. Racism, sexism, gender, ageism, they're all the same thing. They're discrimination based upon prejudice.
Yeah.
No one ever says it that way. We just mix all the words together and they don't mean the same thing. This is
Yeah.
another piece.
Because
Words mean something.
words mean something, and you have to be careful. You have to really be careful, because if you want to sell or you want to influence, no doubt emotion is the vastly superior way to do that. But boy, when you're coming to deciding what you think, you got to try to get rid of as many emotions as possible and just look at the data. You got to use a piece of paper and write it down. Otherwise, you could be going the wrong direction.
I have 6 pages of notes here on a podcast I was listening to with the diary of a CEO, the guy who does that.
Oh, I
And
think I've seen that once or twice.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I watched that quite a bit actually. The guy on there was a guy named Chase Hughes,
Okay, I've heard of
ex-military
the name.
guy,
Yeah.
right? And he's a behaviorist, I guess is the
Okay,
term.
cool.
But he goes into like how you condition people, all that kind of stuff, how you can tell if you're being conditioned. But he said all ads do 2 things. They make you compare yourself to others,
Yes.
and they show that you're not good enough.
Yes. Yes. Correct. Yeah.
Right? That's the emotional side you're talking about.
Yeah.
He went further and said, if you capture people's ideas through ideas, that's the intellectual side of things. But when you capture their identity, that's the emotional side of things.
Oh, that's so
You make
interesting.
someone identify, and that will determine their actions because they have to act in a way that matches their perceived identity.
Yeah, like that's the tribe. It's the
Yep.
tribe mentality, right?
No,
And
it just
and you can force people, because you can say, look, you're for us or against it. You got to choose, right? You on that side or you on this side?
But that's how people get pushed further and further
Yeah.
to the edge.
Yeah.
Because the ones who are leading the group say, no, you can't be 80% in agreement with me. You've got to be 100% in agreement with me.
Yeah.
And people just get pulled because, like, okay, I identify with that, so I must be the same as that.
Yeah. Yeah. Black and white thinking. I think that's another trigger. If you start going like this has got to be this way or that way on complex issues, just be careful, right? You're ripe for getting manipulated.
If anyone says the answer is simple, don't agree with them.
Yeah, usually it's more complex than that.
If they
There's
say
nuance
simply it's
too.
this, then that's it. They've lost the argument in my mind because they're not acknowledging the other things.
Yeah. I think that's really good. If there's nothing else I'd like to get across to myself and other people is, boy, because I want to be careful with this, because sometimes black and white thinking is important. Sometimes you need a go, no go, go decision, right? Otherwise, you sit around spinning in circles. So sometimes
Black and white thinking drives action.
black and white thinking drives action. Yes. And I think you can do that with probability, but you got to set a threshold. It's like, okay, above 80% certainty, that's a go. Now we got 20% that'll kill us in there, but there's enough that we got to move, right? I think it's
Yeah,
some,
but you've just added, 3 layers of complexity onto a true black and white yes or no, right? And that's what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get people to understand that there's going to be a level of mental effort to do this. It's not just going to be clear cut where someone's going to feed you yes no responses. That's not going to work for you to maintain your ability to have critical thinking and to kind of exert kind of common sense in a
yeah.
situation.
And it's work, it's tons of work. So that's why we've developed mental models. We've developed these simplified methods of thinking to help us move accurately, but without all the mental efforts. Like one of the most ones I'm most familiar with is I'm learning electronics. And so from the ground up, everything is physics. I mean, physics drives everything. And then inside of electronics, there's something called Ohm's law. And what it does is it tends to simplify physics. They sort of group these rules together. And as long as certain parameters, they call it a little sandbox. And as long as you bring components into your sandbox that obey these certain rules, you don't need to use Maxwell's equations, which is a very complicated set of math to get to the same answer as Ohm's law, which is like simple arithmetic, basically. And I think that is incredibly helpful and incredibly useful for certain things, actually. But boy, oh boy, you got to make sure and you got to trust the mental model that you're using to do that and know when it applies and when it doesn't apply. And if that makes any sense.
Well, one of the things I could say is once you recognize what you're trying to do,
Yeah.
whatever tools you're going to use to do it are fine, right? No
Yes.
one's going to say, you've got to screw this bolt in, this nut on a bolt, but you have to use your hands.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Right? It's a tool. It's a tool like anything else.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah.
and the tool's got its limits, right? What it can do and what it can't do is there. But you, as the person using the tool, are the one who understands that
Yeah.
and understands this tool doesn't fit here. I need to use a different tool. This
Yeah.
equation doesn't fit here. I need to use a different equation,
Yeah.
right? This, if you're cooking in the kitchen, this stove doesn't get hot enough for me to cook that. I can't use this
Yeah.
stove. I know that's not the best example, but the idea I think comes across is it's up to you to realize when the tools you're working with aren't sufficient for what's needed.
Yeah. When you don't get the outcome you want. But this, man, there's just no way around just thinking. There's no, I don't think there's any way around this.
Why would you want there? Why would you not want to think?
Because it's work. It's hard.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, it'll probably get us to burn some more calories. That was it. 20 is it what is it 30% of the calories the body burns are done by the brain, so it's
That's what they say. I have no idea.
if we can get people to think more, maybe we'll lose some weight.
Well, when you want to control people, you don't want them thinking very much at all. So
And I was thinking about that. The short form social media, the doom scrolling that everyone's doing, and I get caught in it all the time. I'll say I've got a minute here. Let me see something entertaining, and I pull up something that is entertaining,
yeah,
and maybe it's some thinking, maybe not. And then next thing I know, it's 15 minutes later, and I've gone through a bunch of these, and I'm like, what the
yeah,
heck's going on?
yeah,
And it's feeding that dopamine
yeah.
hit, right? That little bit of feeling that I get watching this thing, and it's just a waste of time.
Hey, maybe it just comes down to we're all just driving addicts. Maybe that's just we're
Well,
all
aren't we?
addicts. Yeah, I'm tend to think I would like to believe we're more than that. I really would, but I'm not 100% sure.
That was one of the things that this guy talked about on that podcast I mentioned was we've got dopamine,
Yeah.
which is the pleasure sensor,
Yes.
done by pleasure, and then we've got serotonin, which is the happiness.
Yes. Yes.
and you need to find a way to increase the serotonin and to limit the dopamine,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
the problem is we have so many ways to feed us dopamine. The news tries to do it with those
Oh,
emotional
of
questions I
course.
was
Yeah.
asking. The social media all does it with the short form stuff. Video games do this. You know, porn or whatever TV show you're watching, Game of Thrones, whatever it is, it's all giving you a dopamine hit.
Everything's a dopamine hit or whatever. And
So,
especially,
so he had a way of dealing with this, and he said, you need to find a way to make your future self more important than your present self,
yeah, yeah,
right? And the idea, let me find the exact term because I really think this is something I need to work on. So this is what he calls this is how he defines discipline: prioritizing your future self over your present self.
yeah. That's
And he
exactly.
said, put concern forward. So you have concern for your future, your
Yeah.
health, your mental capabilities, whatever. You have a concern. And then future backward should show gratitude. You should be grateful to your prior self for all the
Oh,
hard work
yeah.
they did to make you the way you are.
For the
So you
sacrifice.
put in those efforts. You made that sacrifice. You worked out. You did whatever it is. And so today, feel grateful, get your dopamine from what you did in the past.
That's really insightful into thinking about yourself across time instead of
He
just
says,
right now, right?
generate those old pictures of yourself using those apps and
Yeah.
just put that picture everywhere and so you see it every day, an old version of yourself. If you're worried about being overweight, take pictures of being fat and put them everywhere around you so you see that as your future and you realize that you've got a responsibility on that. Tony Robbins talked about this too at one point. You know, he's like, you've got to visualize the end product
Yes.
and make it, and then visualize the worst case scenario, and
Yeah.
make that so fearful that it drives you to make a decision today.
Yeah. That's right. And if there's some way you can make that process fun, you're more likely to do it now.
Well, the other thing which I found very insightful is habits are important. We all know that,
Oh,
right?
of course. Yeah.
But his thing was make habits the end product, not the feed, the source that started.
Yeah.
So find a way to make the habit which you want, the good habit you're trying to create. Find a way to make that the end product,
Yes.
right? As opposed to what you're trying to create, what you're trying to create. You're as opposed to what you're trying to make other things happen, right? So you're going to get healthier because you exercise, but the habit is exercise. So don't think I'm going to get healthier because I'm going to build a habit of exercise. Make how am I going to create a habit of exercise? That's the goal.
Yeah.
Not I'm going to lose weight. You already know you need to lose weight. You already know how to do it.
Yeah.
What you need to do now is build the habit. So how do I make the habit the goal? And that's why, putting your shoes next to the door, setting the alarm, getting up early, all the little things to lower the bar of effort. But what else can you do to make that, yeah, envision yourself 500 pounds sitting on the couch, unable to move. Okay, maybe that's part of it. Whatever the routine is, build that routine to make the habit just the product of the work.
That's so interesting.
Not the work itself. The habit's not the work. The habit's the product of the work.
Yeah. That is so insightful. I thought I had something really good to say and I forgot what it is. I know what it was. Is like I believe that what you're talking about is the limited free will that we have.
That is the limited free will that we
I've got to always bring this back to God and jujitsu somehow, actually, so
Okay, but
what I'm trying to do.
I understand the term. I don't understand the connection.
Because your free will in this moment, you are gonna get to decide how you want your future to be. That's free will, right? So the process of going through establishing habits is by very definition free will in action. As opposed to just running with preset programs, which has nothing to do with free will.
So you're saying if you don't create those habits, then you're predestined, but if you create those habits, you have free will?
I think so. I don't know if I'm going to say that. That sounds really good what you just said, actually. Maybe because if you have no free will, then you're totally and utterly manipulated by your environment and culture. as opposed if you have somebody, you're like, no, I'm going to chart a different path for myself in disregard to what culture and environment and the current tribe you're in tells you to do. And I might be stretching quite a bit with this one.
So I'm trying to think here. So the world is set up in a way to make you into something, and that is without it with no extra effort on your part, you're going to end up at point A at the end of all this.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, absolutely.
However,
Pretty much. Yeah.
if you take the effort, if you take the pain, the discomfort, if you take the whatever it is that we're talking about and put in the energy to do that and accept that and use that to build upon,
Yes.
you could end up at point B, even with the world set up the way it is, and it's still going to impact you because there's
Of
no way to
course.
get out
Of
of it.
course.
But
Of
you will
course.
be able to fight upstream, fight the river, or whatever it is, go against the current to a certain extent, and steer. What's the old thing? If you steer off by 1 degree at the end of the journey, you're way off, you're somewhere else, right?
Depends on how far you go. Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like if I look and say, okay, so a 1 degree change in course today, tomorrow is not going to be any different. But a 1 degree change in course today in 20 years will be very different.
Yeah, it's like that's what they say. These little tiny baby habits add up, in a really significant way down the road. And I'm just trying to get myself to think, is that really free will? Because I know everybody has the ability to do that, right?
Well, look, can I ask you a question? So, do you think that God wants you to be is is going to make you be the same? He's got an idea of what you're supposed to be, and that's how you're going to end up at the end of your life? Or do you think there
Ooh.
is an opportunity where you end up being a good person, a bad person, a great person, a so-so person? You know, what? How do you feel about that? What's your thinking?
Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna go into heretic mode just for a second, actually, right?
Okay.
Um,
Let me get the coffee out.
So and I've been thinking about this a lot, and when I tell some of my church friends this, they just literally cringe at this when I say this, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it anyways. So my thought is if and you gotta understand something. I have incredibly limited IQ compared to what God does, right? So God's probably got a 10,000 IQ. I've got like maybe 120 on a good day, right? So if God knows what I'm gonna do, that means by definition, in my mind, and man, I could get tripped up on this, that I don't have free will. And so what I think, which is kind of going against everything. This is the heretic part. That means God doesn't know everything, right? I think God can see a million possibilities, things I could do, but he doesn't know which one I'm going to choose necessarily. And that freaks out my Christian friends because they're like, oh, now God's not all powerful. And I'm like, yeah, but in this sense, I think God intentionally limited his ability to give us free will because if he knows what we're going to do, there's no free will in that, right? And I know these arguments have gone around for 100 years, and I'm not smart enough to really figure it out that much, but I just think we actually do. I mean, my whole point of this is I actually think we have the ability to make choices because some people feel like they don't. Some people feel like I'm in a box and there's nothing I can do about it. And my
So,
thought is there's always something you can do.
so I've got this idea. What would the purpose of life be if everything was predetermined? Why live life? If you know what the end game is, if you know what the result is, just go straight to the result. Why play out this farce of life that we have?
Yeah,
So to me, there has to be something that makes it potentially better or worse so that you could see, does it get better or worse?
I think so. And I
Right. So,
think
and I know this would upset an all-knowing, all omniscient, omnipotent viewpoint of God, but to me, it's like that would be a really boring world to live in. Why do anything if it's just going to end up the way it's supposed to be?
Well, and a lot of people believe that. There was a, oh crap, what is it? It's called Landman. It's like a really good show or whatever. And one of the guys in the show, they were negotiating an oil deal, and one of the guys is like, "Look, this is all written in the cards anyways, and it really doesn't matter. It's like this is we're gonna do this because this is what's gonna it's gonna happen no matter what we do. This thing's gonna happen anyway. So yeah, sure, let's do the deal." And he honestly believed that. And it's just such an interesting thing to think about it. But I do believe we have free will. Now, the question is, how much free will do we actually have, right? And I believe not that much, but it's enough to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, you can go and make the argument that the society you're born into,
Ah,
the social level you have in that society, the amount of wealth, the intelligence, physical capability, all of that are things that are going to impact the choices you have in your life, and therefore they're going to impact the decisions you can make.
yes, yes,
Right?
yeah. Oh, that's a good way to put it. The choices you have at any given moment.
Mhm.
That's correct. Because you don't
You
have
never,
unlimited
you
choice.
never don't have a choice. You always have a choice.
Yeah, they could be bad and worse, but they're yeah.
As with as with every election in history that I can think of is
That's what a friend was telling me the other day. He's like, "Oh, don't worry, it can always get worse, no matter how bad it is." I'm like, yeah, nice upbeat, nice and upbeat thing. But yeah, you're probably true, right? It can always get worse, actually.
what's the old thing? Can God make a rock so big he can't move it?
Yeah, that's just a like that's a logical fallacy error, whatever, like that. But yeah,
Yeah, but I mean the idea is all knowing and all powerful are kind of contradict or all powerful is a contradictory idea.
I think yeah, maybe maybe. I mean, but you got to remember, this is God we're talking about, so we're trying to understand. We're trying to like put some. We have this little box, and we're
Well,
trying to put something really big in the box. It just
you
doesn't.
could you could always say the answer to everything, which is it depends.
It depends, and that's not a bad way. That's what they taught us in
No,
college.
that it really so much of the world they want the black and white yes or no answer,
They
but
want
at
it.
the end of the day, it depends.
Yeah, there was it was so funny in finance class. I had a really good teacher, and he's like, tonight it was like a 3 hour session on weasel words. And it's from a finance. So he goes, no matter what the question is, you start out with, it depends. And it's customary, usually, most of the time. He goes, this is the language you used. You never say definitively this is going to happen.
Well, Scott, you and I can come up with caveats to any argument,
Anything. Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the ability to do that is what feeds into the people who find the one exception and say that breaks the rule,
Yeah.
right? It's like all or not all general statement: men are physically stronger than women.
As a
Oh, but
general,
I know a woman who's stronger than men,
I know there's always one. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. And so, but that doesn't negate the general rule.
Yeah. No, no, not at all, actually.
But then, but you could say it depends.
It depends. It depends on a lot of factors, actually. And then in some ways you can spin in circles so much you never get anything done. So there was,
Oh
I
yeah,
think
that's when you get a bunch of smart people in a room, that's exactly what happens.
that's exactly that. So there, it's good up to a certain point, and then there's another guy as well. His name is Chad Wright. He's a Navy SEAL. He does these like ultra long 100-mile marathon runs, and in his mind, he's a very black and white thinker. He's like, there's only two outcomes of this race. Either I'm going to win, number one, or my body's going to break, option two. There's only two possible outcomes. And I'm like, holy crap! I mean, that's some incredible
The
thinking.
power of constraint.
Because you have to, because there's too many variables. We're not smart enough. This is why you got to test stuff. This is the key in marketing is like, well, you have to go through ad one, two, three, four, five to figure out what's going to work because we're just not smart enough. The problem's too complicated. So we gotta throw some tests out and watch what happens, and then
but
it's going to lead us in that
but
direction.
in some cases, you need to define, you need to limit the options, right?
You have to limit them absolutely.
So in this your scenario you're talking about, you limit yourself to a certain number of variables, so you don't get like you can't figure out what changed in a situation.
Yes, right.
In an ideal world, you do all these experiments and you can have one variable at a time and figure out what the
Ideally, ideally,
you
yeah.
know. But no, I was just thinking when you mentioned the other guy and running the outcomes for running, and I'm like, so I walk around my neighborhood every day, and the other day was I'm gonna see if I can jog. So I started jogging instead of walking,
Yeah.
and about I don't know about a quarter of the way through, I'm like, oh, this is getting hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I said, well, I could stop now,
Yeah.
or I could see how far I go. But that how far I go means that there's a decision I have to make as to I've gone far enough.
Yeah.
So instead I said I'm gonna go for a count of whatever, 300
Perfect.
steps, 500 steps,
Perfect.
whatever.
Yeah.
And then I find myself, so I think I did 300 more steps is what it was. And
Perfect.
so
That's
I get to
beautiful.
250. I'm going, that's enough, right? That's enough. Right? In my mind, I'm like, I don't have to do that last 50. No one's watching. No one heard me say that.
That's right. Yeah. No one's watching. Nobody heard you say that. But I'm telling you, if you're that kind of guy or woman that says, I'm gonna push it just a little bit more, there's, man, when you start doing that from a young age, I mean, there's just like, look at Elon Musk. That dude's like, we can always, come on, we can always do a little bit more. I'm sure it drives other people crazy, but look where he is, right? Look at the crap he's done because of that philosophy. I think yeah, yeah. I think I think these are all the answers. Like Chris, I think that all the answers are here. It's like you've just got to intentionally put yourself in an uncomfortable position. We've talked about it, just it always keeps coming back to the same thing.
So we kind of strayed, right? In the beginning,
Well,
we were talking about how to look at something that's happening and to figure out, I guess, truth is the word we use, but I think,
closer to
yeah,
whatever truth is.
factually what's going on, and then we create our own understanding of that,
Yeah,
of
right.
what's going on, right? Instead of getting fed the political diatribe of one side or
Of
another,
course, of course.
or the biased view of an educated person versus a working class person versus
Of course.
or race or gender or anything you want, any breakdown you want. Someone's going to state what's happening through their eyes. So
Always.
to you need to be able to figure out how they're seeing it through their eyes and go back to what they're seeing and decide whether or not you agree with how they're seeing it through their eyes.
Yes, yes, and no. So I think these questions are super important. I just had another thing. So there's David Marquega. He had built a ladder of leadership. And so he had a series of questions that, let's say, come back to, oh, this is what just happened, right? And so in cases you're like, well, he did no doubt that guy is interpreting something. So then you can back up and you can say, tell me what you saw instead of don't tell me what the outcome happened, just tell me what you saw. And language is like, oh, I saw this really fast red car. I'm like, ooh, oh, interesting. Well, how fast, right? Or, or slow was the red car
It was
moving?
going 35 miles an hour. That was so fast.
I know. It's like everything is relative to other sort of stuff, actually. So,
But
so
but but again, with a broad enough baseline of understanding of the world and how it works,
yes,
you could ask those questions, right? So if some kid says something, they don't have the life experience of an older person. So
yes,
when they say it was huge, you know that it could just be big compared to them versus big versus how you and I would
yeah,
do think it
yeah,
was huge.
yeah,
So you know that. Well, you know when you're talking to a kid who's got a limited life experience that that's the way it is.
yeah, right.
I wanted a person being any different. This is why you talk about age and wisdom going together, why the wise ones in the old tribes were always the older ones,
Yeah,
because they had so much knowledge, so much worldly experience to draw upon that they could look at things without getting the bias in the way. They could move more of the bias out of the way and
yes,
look at
yes,
things without it.
yeah,
This, and I think people we kind of belittle age anymore, and we don't respect it at least in our society the way we used to. But I forgot which book I was listening to. We were talking about the little grandmotherly person who meets someone and that person's girlfriend and knows, oh, they're going to get married and they're going to do fine,
yeah,
versus someone else in the family, oh no, they're going to get divorced in a year. And you're
yeah,
like, well, they don't know anything about them. No, they know everything about them
yeah,
because everything's the same in the world.
yeah,
It,
yeah,
it's all there's a baseline of understanding that if you've got, you can apply that to all your thinking.
yeah.
You should always This is why curiosity is important and learning is important and understanding is important, because the more you learn, the more you understand, the more you see and internalize and make connections in your head,
Yes, yeah.
better you're going to be able to call BS when you see it.
Yeah, and I can't remember, there was a whole book on this sort of stuff. This is absolutely true what you're talking about. With no, like, well, I don't know. I just have a feeling that this is what's going to go on. But those feelings are based on all this previous data and patterns. It's basically some sort of form of pattern recognition. I've seen this a bunch of times before. And it's like I can tell this in couples. It's like sometimes when I can just watch how couples talk to each other, it's like I'm like, oh yeah, they're probably gonna be fine. As other times I'm like, 5 years, they're not gonna just the way they talk.
I forget which psychologist or whatever did that experiment where he looked at couples and he could tell within a few minutes whether they were going to last or not.
Yeah,
But there were
yeah.
some things that were like immediate cues that they wouldn't last.
Immediate cues,
And
yeah.
it was like if you ever caught a micro expression or expression on one of the faces of not disdain, not disdain,
Yeah, disdain or those are the words, disdain, disgust, something like that.
then you knew that the person had no respect for the other person,
Yeah.
and therefore that it would never
It
last.
wouldn't. It's just a matter of time before the clock plays out on them. Yeah, it's like so fascinating. So I think this goes back to like the David Goggins thing, a little video I was watching. He's like, listen, you know what to do. It's like you just don't want to do the work.
Yep.
And I think that's true most of the time. And there are cases where I actually don't know what to do, but those are few and far between.
Well, I do wonder actually if less people know what to do. And I'm thinking, in an era where parents had more time to spend with their kids, when the kids were being had at a younger age, so there was just, more time in that aspect, where kids got to see the development and growth of their parents through the parents being in their 20s and their 30s
Yeah,
and their 40s,
yeah,
and how that would impact the kids' understanding of the world, right? And seeing how their parents figured things out. The fact that you had the boomers are all retiring, and I think the boomers, maybe the Gen Xers, are the last ones whose parents were like World War II age. I think
yeah,
I think it's mostly the boomers, but maybe
yeah,
some of the Gen Xers. But then the boomers' kids, the boomers were there for the boom, right? They had a lot of economic growth. They had a lot of I don't want to say an easy life, but a better life
yeah,
than prior generations.
yeah,
And so the hardships that I don't know how many people saw or understood what it meant to go hungry, even if they never went hungry themselves.
yeah,
They hear stories from their parents or their grandparents about not having enough food on the table and things
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Um, we don't talk about those things anymore. I,
No, no, we don't talk
I
about it.
remember when Russia invaded Ukraine, and I'm like, oh my God, it's a major world power invading another country. It's not like these, it's a horrible way to look at it, but these little countries fighting each other that we deal with. I mean, and so I'm like going, are we going to go back to rationing? Are we going to go back to
Yeah,
drafting people? Is any of this? And I know we haven't sent any of our soldiers to that battle, but it just those thoughts occurred to me, and I'm like, how many people would that have occurred to even think about those
yeah,
possibilities?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, nothing really bad happens here. I mean, other aka the fire and stuff, but I mean, that's bad, but nothing like other people coming in trying to kill you. I mean, we typically don't
I
see
mean,
that.
I can't imagine the idea that within 100 miles of where you live, there might be an active war front.
Yeah, right, right. That's a different thing. I was thinking in my head too, you're talking about the hunger thing. Because I've been hungry plenty of times with my fasting that I've done, just to just just to try to break out like what's the head hunger, what's the physical hunger actually. But I'm
Yeah,
telling you,
hunger where you have no options.
yeah,
Or
no, it's different knowing that at
I,
any
I can't say
second,
no options because, like I said, you always have options. But hunger where your options aren't easy to overcome the hunger.
right, like literally in 30 seconds, I could be eating whatever I wanted. I could walk into the kitchen. That's a different scenario than there is no options. Like you're just,
I would say you fasting is empowering to you because it feeds your ability to have discipline and all the other kinds of
yeah,
things.
it does. Yeah,
You starving because there's no food is not empowering. In fact, it's the opposite.
Not, it's a bad idea, right?
Even if you don't look at the impact on the body, the impact on your mind, the fact that you're hungry and can't do anything about it in your mind.
Yeah, yeah,
That I mean that's got to be disheartening to a point where I don't
yeah.
I can't imagine that. I didn't.
No,
I didn't have to. I can articulate what I think it might be, but that my worry is that I'm not sure. As empathetic as people are today, with all the EQ and all the other types of emotional intelligence people have today, I'm not sure that they can articulate these thoughts of bad times, right? Bad things happening, people being killed in the streets, or the government coming and taking away people
yeah,
because they don't fit because of some kind of a
yeah.
thing aspect of their character.
I mean, I think we're seeing it now with the fires. I mean, there's people that are just really losing their house. I mean, they're just watching it burn down.
You've seen those neighborhoods where there's nothing left.
Yeah, I mean,
or,
that's
or
very
even if there's a
sad.
house left. I mean, imagine you being the only house out of like 200 houses that still survives.
I know, I know.
It's going to be years before you have neighbors. I mean, it's got to be weird.
And there's real loss. There's like real pain happening right now, you know.
The community's gone, right? Even if your house is still there, all the services you use, all the businesses you go to, all the people you know in the community, they're impacted. So
I know. Then I heard now there's issues of like insurance may not pay. It's like, and how are they going to pay? And then how are you going to do it? The cost is going to go up. Who's going to rebuild it?
a lot of them had their fire insurance canceled by the insurance
Yeah,
companies,
yeah,
yeah, in the last month, in the last couple of months.
yeah, yeah.
You know, what was that?
I know. I'm saying it's a real problem actually. And then some people are like, oh, too bad. Rich guy's house burned down. So what? He's going to afford more.
Oh, that was something. I wrote it down somewhere. I know where I wrote it down. James Woods, the actor, his house burned down,
Yeah.
and someone on one of the social media platforms said, "Oh yeah, karma." I'm like, dude, that's not karma. But he had a statement. He goes, he's not going to worry about them. He goes, they're a fleck of spit on the arc of infinity.
Oh, isn't that
And
interesting?
I just his ability to say that in the moment when someone's they're trying to get a reaction from him by telling him about this
I
social
know.
media thing. He goes,
Yeah.
they are an arc of, they are a fleck of spit on the arc of infinity. I just like that. It's just the ability to come up with such a deep insult at that time. But I need to come up with some things like that, a few sayings to be able to pop them out.
It's just, and that's kind of like us. We're walking around and like a $20 bill fell out of our pocket. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. Like, okay. Yeah. Big,
Hmm.
I can live. As opposed to having your whole life savings wiped out. That's a different level of pain. So
Well, these. So, on one sense, you look at these houses and you go, "Oh, they're all rich, right?" Because these are all $3, $4, $5 million houses
yeah,
in many
right.
cases. But that's still your home.
But still, your home.
It's
Yeah,
still your community,
I know.
you
Yeah,
know. And yeah, so it's a bigger dollar amount. So maybe hopefully they have funds available. Not everyone who's got a big house has money, or
no,
has
no, no,
has
no, no.
readily available money. Put it that
Yeah,
way.
right. Yeah.
Right. So,
It's
yeah.
just so interesting, though. Yeah, yeah.
But
So I
then,
mean,
yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
I say, but then the news yesterday was talking about, Biden had agreed to cover 100% of the costs for 180 days, and that was announced during a news briefing, and I'm like, huh, is that normal? And then I found out later that 75% is like the normal amount.
Oh,
So in other words, the California state is not going to have to pay for any of the firefighting efforts. It's what it sounded like, and I'm like, this really sounded like a lame duck presidency saying, you know what, screw it, we're just going to go ahead and spend money. That was honestly what came across in my head. Is like, of course, Harris is from California, so I could see her wanting to have that happen. But
yeah.
I just, it's like if they had won and were actually going to stay in power, would they have agreed to spend 100% on this?
Probably. I don't know. From what I understand politics, and when they deal with money, it's different than normal people dealing with money. They're dealing with a monopoly.
Oh,
Monopoly. It's a
I,
different thing.
I went down a rabbit hole earlier this week. I don't know. Oh, have you ever heard of this Reddit page called Map Porn?
Mm-mm.
So it's a website, or I guess a channel on Reddit that just shows maps, infographic maps that have you some kind of statistic. And one of the things on there was that it was showing you the states whose total GDP is less than the San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah.
And so I started looking. 45 out of all 50 states have a smaller GDP than just the San Francisco Bay
That
Area.
is crazy. Isn't that crazy?
So I was looking at this. California, New York, Illinois, Texas, and Florida are the only ones that are bigger than that. So
Yeah,
Bay Area by itself, and I was using 2022 numbers, which was a $26 trillion budget for our
hmm,
$26 trillion economy for America.
that's crazy.
Bay Area was 2.5% of the country.
Wow.
So that what got me thinking about this is someone was complaining that California gets all the attention, or all these things, and I said, well, maybe the reason is because California makes up, was it 18% of the country's economy?
Yeah,
California by itself makes that's with San Francisco makes up 80% of the economy.
yeah,
New York is only 8%. That's less than half
yeah,
of California. Illinois 4%, Texas 9%, and Florida 5%.
yeah.
So you wonder why California gets so much attention. It is a fifth of the economy. You know,
Yeah, I was watching something the other day where they're saying that if California could be broken out as a separate country, it'd be like the fifth largest economy in the world or
I
something.
think it's now the sixth, but yeah, the
Yeah.
idea of being it's large enough by itself to. Um, did I write down the number? Well, let's see. 18% of 26 trillion, whatever that is. That's bigger than a lot of countries out there. So,
Yeah, well, 10, 2.6, probably about five-ish or so.
but if you look at it, yeah, that 2020, so from there I went into the US, the government budget. And so
Yeah.
for 2022, because I was trying to be consistent with all these numbers, the budget was 6.3 trillion.
Mm, that's a
Of that 6.3 trillion, the government only brought in 4.9 trillion in taxes, which means there was a deficit of 1.9 trillion in that year. Which means basically what? 20 some odd percent, almost 30% of the budget was deficit spending.
yeah, and that's we're gonna get ourselves in trouble one of these
Yeah.
days, actually.
So
Yeah.
4.1 trillion of that was mandatory spending.
Yeah.
Things like Medicare and Social Security and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Um, then 0.91 was military. That's considered discretionary. So a little less than a trillion was military. So discretion, they could cut it because
Yeah,
because
right.
it's discretionary. 3/4 of a trillion was non-military. So
Okay.
that's I think the stuff that probably can I don't I want to say more easily be cut, but those
Yeah.
are also the things that probably make life better for a lot of people. And then 475 billion was interest on the
Yeah, there's a lot of interest, which is interesting because where's that interest going? I guess it goes to the debt holders, which many are in the United States.
a lot of them are foreign, right? A lot of people buy U.S. bonds. So
I'd be curious to see like what percentage that is. It's like how much of internal versus, external.
I'd like to see that over time because I think one of the reasons why in the
Yeah,
80s and
trust
90s
fund.
we were doing so well is because we were the safe place for people to put their money
Yeah,
from.
yeah. Yeah, I remember
Um,
back then the Japanese were going to take over LA and
yeah, they owned huge parts of New York and all that kind of stuff. Um, but one of the things, I used to think, oh yeah, we need to bring down the debt. We need to bring down the debt. We need to pay it down or whatever. And I'm like, do we? Now I'm at a point where do we need to? I think we
well, they
we
always
need to
say
control
to
deficit spending. We need it not to grow too much, but is it better to bring the debt down? Kind of the Dave Ramsey viewpoint of economics, or is it better to grow the economy to bring in more money?
well, that's what they're doing. They typically look at debt as percent of GDP, right? But that's growing actually. But here's the Dave Ramsey thing, right? Is that debt equals risk. So the more debt you have, whether it's personal for a country, the more risk you have. And that's why he's not a fan of debt. He's like, I'd rather go slow and steady because man, if you have too much debt, that can kill a lot of ideas and kill a lot of businesses. So I've been really thinking about that. I'm really trying to eliminate all of my debt. I think this year I'm going to move to be completely debt free. Was my
I've got my mortgage, and that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I got a couple credit cards left and a small mortgage. I think I'm going to try to wipe all that out this year if I can. So,
That's good. My mortgage is another 3 years or so, and I'll be
mhm.
happy with that. Yeah, but last year I paid off my old condo because I never sold it, right? And I paid off one of my cars. Actually, so I have a little bit left on one car,
Yeah,
but But that's also 0%. So why would I bother to spend to pay it off any faster?
Yeah, that from financial sense, that does make sense. But then he sort of explained it, and from the numbers, it's like, why would you, if you can get in the market, like stock market, maybe 10 to 12% a year, and you've got like a 2% or 2.5% home loan, like, why would you pay that off as opposed to putting it in the market? And he's a big fan of paying it off. And it's so interesting. And it's because the numbers, of course, the numbers are that way. But his logic is that I think you end up making more money paying your mortgage. And here's why. Because there's something that happens to you psychologically when you're totally out of debt. For one, you have less risk, right? And you like have a little more pep in your step, and you might take bolder actions in business stuff that you wouldn't in otherwise. So he says, what we've seen is m- getting out of debt is the most important thing to making lots of money, which is kind of interesting, you know?
But it's also interesting because most of the people that I see who make a lot of money
Yeah.
actually use debt. They use it as a tool.
Yeah, and you can. It's especially in real estate, you get a lot of leverage off of that.
Well, I mean, just let's look at it. Okay, let's analyze this for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so if your interest rate is, I think my interest rate on my home is 2.9% because
Okay,
I
good.
financed it when it was pretty low. So I 2.9%. What is inflation?
Inflation is typically 2 to 4%, say 3% on
Mhm.
average.
So the dollar I spend today
Yes.
is going to be worth 3% less next year.
Yes, right.
So if I use next year's dollar to pay off my mortgage, that's a break even,
Yeah.
right? Now, if we take interest and inflation, and we take the government printing money
Yeah.
and basically devaluing the dollar, and
Yeah.
we take all of that into play,
Yeah.
if my interest rate is low enough, then
Yeah.
I actually am spending less money in the future than today. So I could pay off my mortgage today at whatever dollar amount, or I
Yeah.
could pay it off in 10 years at this higher dollar amount. But if we look at the difference, the dollar I spend in 10 years is worth less than the dollar I
Yeah.
spent today.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, I got it. I mean, and that is absolutely true. The numbers bear that out 100%. That's assuming you're 100% disciplined, which almost nobody is.
Well, I mean,
If
you
you're
don't get
disciplined,
you
then
don't get a
great.
mortgage you
Yeah.
can't pay. You set it up to pay it. I mean, there's tools to make this work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And if you have enough money to pay off the mortgage, and you're just not using it for that purpose, that's empowering too, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
your risk level is significantly lower. Although most people are not in that position, actually. What most people do is like, oh, let me go pay off these 30% credit cards. I'll put a second on my house because, of course, my house is going to go forever. And they pay them off and they just run them up again, right? Because they lack the discipline.
well, that's that, but yeah, so that's a different aspect too. I mean, that's um,
But that is normal. That's the average Joe doing that.
well, I still think that if I ever got to be very, very wealthy and I didn't have to worry about a regular job,
Yeah.
I would want to go get a law degree, and I would sue all the credit card companies in a class action lawsuit saying you screwed up the finances of every American.
Yeah, 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 they did it though. I do agree with that. But at the same time, you've got to take responsibility for your own actions.
Yeah, but I remember in college, a college kid, I didn't have a job at the time, and I
I
could
know,
get a credit card.
I know, exactly. Well, and that's why Biden wants to handle some of the student debt, which I'm like, okay, I don't really want to pay for it through increased
No,
tax.
I'm against it. As if with everything, it depends.
It depends.
I'm against it on general principle of the fact that you had so many of these of this so much of this debt is not in what I would call traditional education,
Yeah, right.
and it's in stuff that people should never have been going into, and they got sucked into, and they got salesmen selling them this stuff.
Yes.
Um, and I don't think we should be buying them out of that,
Yeah.
right? So I think some things should be covered because I do think it's an investment in our society.
Yes.
Other things I don't think should be covered because I think it was just bad decision making.
Well, it's bad to say no, and I totally agree with that.
And
And
now maybe if we can go back against those companies that made those loans to the people and somehow hit them up for that, that would be something.
yeah, that'd be awesome. But then you figure, you got this young kid out of college. with a bachelor's degree in underwater basket weaving that can't even get a job for 10 bucks an hour.
And where were their parents to tell them don't do that?
And they are screwed for the rest of their life because you can't discharge that in bankruptcy. So, I mean,
Well, that's a different thing. That is another thing that we got to talk about here. Is I can say I'm bankrupt after doing these other things, but in this case, I can't go bankrupt. I'm financially responsible,
you're finding
and so the only way out of it is I die.
four student loans, or you pay it back, or somebody
That's
else.
like indentured servitude.
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. So on that, I do kind of see what he's doing. I'm like, okay, that's reason because you have 100 grand of debt and you don't have a really good job. I mean, your whole life is screwed up. You're going to be carrying around that debt for the rest of your life. And I don't think that's a good thing. And yeah, you were young and dumb and stupid, and so I guess I'm okay with that. I don't like it from a principle standpoint, but I do understand, when you're young and stupid, it's like your mistakes hopefully you shouldn't have to live with them for the rest of your life.
So I think if we're going to do things like that, you need to force people to take classes in financial
I
responsibility.
agree. I know. I agree.
So to me, that should be one of the qualifications. Of course, this is going to spin up a whole new industry of people milking the government,
Of
but
course.
but setting up classes for people to say you need to show a fiscal responsibility. You need to
Yeah.
understand this. You need to understand financial hygiene. You need to understand how to save money, how to invest money, and the problem is generally as soon as that happens, the left and the right are going to start politicizing the
Of
actual
course. Yeah.
content of this course.
Of course. Of
Oh,
course.
yeah, So the idea was that a lot of conservatives want a Social Security where you can kind of control your own investments,
Which I think is a reasonable idea.
right? But left, the socialist, not socialist, it's bad. The left side of things, the more socialist viewpoint of it is no, we can't do that because the government knows better,
Yeah.
or
Mhm.
the government should, it's either the government knows better or the government should be the one responsible. It's
Yeah.
it's one of those two.
Yeah.
Government should be responsible. I can kind of get government knows better. I definitely don't agree with. So,
Well, that's wouldn't take you more than 2 seconds to figure that one's not true, actually. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. But what it does mean though is that logic and critical thinking is important because there are things you can do in just a few moments that can radically affect your life, the whole rest of your life, actually. You can be burdened by that. It's just critical. You gotta think, man. You gotta,
well, so going back to Dave Ramsey, he has like baby steps to get
yeah,
financially
yeah, yeah.
right, and one of the things is to set aside $1,000 emergency fund,
Emergency fund, yeah, that's step one. Yeah.
and I'm like, what, $1,000 That's nothing, but
It's
for some
nothing.
people that's a massive effort to do,
Yeah,
right? And even if you're living paycheck to paycheck,
yeah,
how how good are you at really not understanding how you spent your money? Are you budgeting? I mean, I remember years ago I was listening to an NPR story talking about people living in poverty, and this was kind of the rural South and that sort of thing, and they were talking about these people, and it was like one woman goes, this is all I've got to for the month for groceries, and so what does her family drink? She takes a bag of Lipton iced tea or the equivalent thereof, and
yeah,
she makes a gallon of iced tea off of one bag, one little tiny bag,
yeah,
and
right.
that's what the family drinks for drinks,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And it's just, oh, she says 25 cents. There we go. We got the liquid for the day. And I'm like, that to me is someone who is paying attention and stretching out their money and understands exactly what's going on.
yeah.
Versus someone who says, I don't have any money. I'm living paycheck to paycheck, and they're at Starbucks,
I know, I know, I know. Man,
right? One person, let's give them help. The other person, you need to learn.
you need to learn. Yeah, yeah. I think Dave Ramsey's doing a good thing as a general rule because it's so cool because he's actually holding people accountable for their behavior as opposed to many people that are like, oh, just this poor guy, which maybe one time, okay, you get a free pass once, but after a while, you're like, you're just being stupid now.
He's talking to people in their 20s and with $200,000, $300,000 of debt and no house,
I know, I know, I know.
right?
But man, the culture, I mean, to some extent, the culture is to blame for that. because you
Culture
look at,
definitely playing for that.
I mean, they're not 100% to blame, but they have a significant thing, which goes back to our free will. It's like, man, you got to think through this. Is that really the right thing to do? And what the credit card company says, hey, man, live now, buy now, pay later.
I remember during one of the Olympics, probably, oh gosh, 3 or 4 Olympics ago,
Yeah,
and the commercial it was a credit card commercial. I want to say it was Barclays, but I don't remember what it was. But it was like they were showing these cool scenes, like these like James Bond in a helicopter, and this, and then they would go in on his watch, and it was a Rolex, and he goes $15,000 now or $60,000 when you retire.
yeah,
You know, and it was doing that kind of thing over and over. And it was like,
yeah.
that's cool. That's the way you need to think about it.
Yeah, that's the way you need to think about it. Which is, I think, what Dave Ramsey is saying is that get out of debt, right? And he's like a evangelical Christian, and he's all about the Bible, saying just you go through the Bible and debt is bad. Debt is bad. Debt equals slavery, pretty much, because you're enslaved to somebody.
The principle is don't be in debt.
That's it. That's the big thing. Because he goes, what's his saying is it's real cool, and I'm still working this in my head. Like you live like nobody else today, so tomorrow you can live like nobody else, something. Which is, you take the pain now, so
But
tomorrow you can live a better life.
I'm sure when you sit down, if you had the ability to talk one on one with Dave Ramsey and actually go into details on this, he could give you a more of an it depends answer. If you've got the funds and the money to pay off your debt and you're using it as a tool, that's a different thing. The problem
Yeah,
is most people with debt have debt because they can't pay it off.
yeah, it's typically consumer debt. Now I've seen him in interviews talk about this, and he's like, and there'll be other really wealthy people who fund real estate with debt and everything like that. And he'll come back and say, listen, I'm worth $300 million. That's how much real estate, and it's all paid for. And I'm telling you, funding real estate through debt is a bad idea. And it's a bad idea because of one problem is it increases risk. And nobody talks about that, the fact that how much increased risk that you have by doing that. Because, a lot of times people have this whole portfolio where they'll be buying this, and then it grows up, they'll take this and rebuy something else. And the whole freaking thing's a house of cards. The
Oh
moment
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it starts going down,
Oh,
everything crumbles.
that's how my mom lost all her money. So
Yeah,
my mom was a real estate agent, and she got into real estate deals with some of her clients, and she overextended.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So if you figure this would have been what, late 80s, early 90s, she had probably a couple $1 million worth of value in property up in Palmdale. So that would have been a lot back then. But
yeah.
she overextended and bought like 9, 10, $11 million of
Oh,
property.
yes,
And then the market fell apart
yes.
in what, I forgot what it was. 2000-ish time frame, right? The dot-com bubble or whatever burst, right?
Yeah, I remember that. And then again in 2008, another.
So I think it was the dot-com burst.
Mhm.
So there wasn't money, and so suddenly no, they couldn't turn over these properties fast enough to make money. So she couldn't afford to pay
Yeah,
off all the stuff. So
yeah,
they let so much property go.
yeah,
And my dad kept telling her, "No, you're overextending. Don't buy another piece of
yeah,
property. You don't have enough to comfortably buy that next piece of property, the next
yeah.
piece of property,
Right,
right?"
right, right.
Um, and that, but that's so I get that aspect of it.
Yeah, and that's what
I
happens, right?
yeah,
Because there's no doubt, that sometimes houses go down, they don't always go up. And look at the fire thing. There's a huge risk. Who
it's
knows
not just
how
that.
many people?
It's the how the local municipality zones the property,
Yeah, there's risk.
right? So,
Yeah,
so you buy a piece of property assuming that it's going to be zoned for residential and it never gets it,
yeah,
or zoned for industrial and it never gets it. Suddenly, you paid a premium price for something that's never going to
yeah,
be worth it,
yeah,
right? So there's a lot of things that can happen in that. I guess the problem I have to some extent is the size of our economy, the growth of our economy is funded by debt,
of course, absolutely.
right?
Consumer debt mostly.
So would he want to? Does he believe we should shrink the economy down? You get rid of all. I mean, everyone pays off their debt, and so there's no more debt out there. What does that do to the economy?
I don't know. I don't know actually.
I think we stagnate a lot, and because then I mean, why would you invest in something if there wasn't the potential for growth?
Yeah,
Why would you loan money out? Right, right. because business loans, I borrow money to make my business bigger, and I have to pay back the loan,
Yeah.
versus angel investors or whatever who give you free money to spend in the hopes that they're going to get something out of it,
Yeah,
right?
and I'll tell you, I think that's a bad idea because I've had a few businesses and I've done that before, and you get your ass handed to you. Actually, it's like
But that's the only thing.
I believe in business. You fund through sales. That's it. One funding source. Go sell more shit.
So that'll definitely slow the economy down.
Yeah, it'll slow down. It slows, but man, there is significantly less
So
risk.
so what ends up happening? But I guess so. I never even thought about it until just now. Um, the pace of growth of the economy once women joined the workforce in mass. So after World War II, 50s was still pretty much single income, right, for
Yeah,
families. But by the 60s, we ended up getting a lot more. And in the 70s and 80s and the 70s was a bad era, but the 80s and the 90s, we had huge growth.
yeah.
And it's all in the professional services. It's all people sitting behind a desk in offices that were doing this stuff.
Right, 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 right,
So
right.
basically, you had a whole industry of people making money selling stuff that no one needed,
Yes,
but by building markets and saying you needed this and teaching them that they needed this, they spent the money even when they didn't have it, and
yes.
that just inflated everything, right? Until you can't buy a house with one income anymore, you can't buy this way anymore, and all of that happened in such a manner that we kind of forced it. In the beginning, women going to the workforce was empowerment. Now it's a requirement,
The requirement, yeah. Yeah,
right?
and I don't know if you know, there's a guy, he wrote a book called Principles, Ray Dalio. He
Yep.
kind of explains this whole thing. There's like a 30 or 40-minute YouTube video. He just goes through everything. And
Oh,
ultimately, the only thing that matters is increased productivity. Because it's going to go like this, but it's only being more productive is the only thing that drives everything, actually.
that's all technology is. Every advancement we've ever had, when I say ever had, and this is reinforces our argument about logic.
Yeah,
Every growth we've had is through the ability to improve productivity, improve efficiency, and it's because when the invention of the candle meant people
yeah,
could work at night,
yeah,
and so suddenly I got 4 extra hours of
yep,
ability to
yep,
produce.
yep,
So
yep,
yes, there's a cost to buy the candles,
yeah,
but as soon as I did that, I can start producing more
yeah.
leather work, more whatever it is that I'm
Whatever
doing,
you
right?
do. Yeah.
And so the more I put out, the more I can sell to someone.
Yes,
Someone else who's not as good at leather work buys my leather work,
yes.
and yes, I make some money off it because I sell it to them at a higher cost than it cost me to make it. But then they, on the other hand, get a better product, and they just have to spend some money. So now they do something else that they're good at, and
Yeah.
suddenly we all specialize at the things we're good at, and that's the way it works. But we're not doing things on even then you're doing things on credit. It's more like a barter kind of system. Oh, you owe me something, so you'll get me next time or something.
Yeah, it's still like a barter thing, and I think, boy, I'm way out of my expertise, which is, but that never stopped me before, but it's like a lot of this when you get to debt, it's like this, what's it? It's an untrue productivity growth. Because it's like, yeah, the GDP goes up, but then there's debt on the books that you got to subtract that out, right? So it's not real growth.
Well, it's like the idea that there's like what $1 bill for every $12 in the economy or something like
Yeah,
that,
it's like it has the
right?
how money speed the acceleration of money or something.
So
It's
one, yeah,
yeah,
so real money versus money
yeah,
versus perceived money. I don't know if that it's actually the way it is, but you know, your wealth is in things that only have value within the society structure that we've created.
yeah, yeah. And I am just, from the Dave Ramsey thing, since I'm so undisciplined, I love the fact of having a Dave Ramsey guy. And I'm going through the baby steps, working things through or whatever, because I need
But
to be
did
completely
you ever listen? Gosh, in the '80s, David Horowitz.
a little bit, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Was it Think Smart? Was that I forgot what his saying was, but he was one of those people, consumer advocates, right?
Yeah,
Consumer Reports does their thing.
yeah,
Clark Howard used to have a radio show and a TV show, and that's another guy who, the thing I remember from him was he says, when your kid turns 16 and gets their first part-time job,
yeah,
help them set up a Roth IRA and
yeah,
max it out,
right, right, right.
and
Start,
do that until they graduate college for those
yeah,
7 years, and they will never have to worry about retirement ever again.
yes, yep, yep,
For
yep.
7 years of savings, they never have to
Yeah.
worry about retirement.
Yeah, I'm so glad that I met this lady Bonnie Woos. I don't know if she's still alive. Maybe she might be actually. but she had me setting up. It was a not, it wasn't a Roth. It was a independent IRA or whatever, just a standard one.
Mhm.
And I just was putting in $100 a month, and it's grown and the market's doing well, and I got I got a couple bucks now because of that. I've been just consistently saving just a little bit over a long period of time, and it just adds up. I mean,
Well,
holy
that's what I missed out on. The old company I worked for had a 5% they would put into your 401k, and then they would match up to another 10%. So I would put in 10%, they put in 15. That's 25% of my income going in annually.
I mean, think in terms of, the market was up 27% last year. It's, if you got $1 million, all of a sudden that's a nice little boost, which is very nice, tax free. So I just, I don't know, I'm a big fan of the Dave Ramsey thing. The slow is steady, the tortoise wins
Well,
every single time.
that is where most of the millionaires in America are.
Yeah, yeah,
Most of the millionaires in America, or not most anymore, but many of them, have rarely broken $100,000 a year in income.
yeah, right, right, right.
It's through lifestyle that they've built their wealth.
Your lifestyle and this stuff works, man. It works every time. And it's not sexy and it's not glamorous and it's not starting an internet startup company and selling out for 20 million bucks. I mean, it's just
Well,
not
but
that fun.
that's the exact same thing that everyone who's mildly good at sports believes. I'm going to be the next sports star and make
Yeah,
millions of dollars, so I don't have to get good grades to get to school,
yeah, right.
right? So, I don't need to go to college because I'm going to become an internet star,
Yeah,
right? And then you feed them tools to do that most of us would find not good, like OnlyFans and things like that, where people are able to sell sex or drugs or some other aspect that we don't tend to like in society.
yeah.
And it's an easy path for people to do things, right?
What do we love sex and drugs in our society? What are you talking about?
Yeah, no. Okay, we love to consume them. We love to talk
But
about them. We love to hate them.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah,
Right? We're still a Judeo-Christian society with very interesting views, very Puritan views on morals compared
yeah.
to much of the world.
And I wonder if those are not right because that's one of the ideas why I've chosen to be a Christian actually is I just like the discipline of it. I like the fact that I have to submit to somebody that's a higher power than me. And I love that. I never would have figured that out unless I did jujitsu. And there's just something magical about just showing up, doing the work, and over a long period of time you get these rewards, right? But it changes you in a significant way as well too. I love that, and I'm really trying to tap down my addictions, because the addictions no matter what it is, it's always some form of I want the pleasure now instead of later.
You ever hear of the Enneagram?
Yeah, yeah, I don't know much about it.
So it's one of those personality categorization tools,
Yeah.
and it came out of the Middle East. I want to say it was Sufi, you
Oh,
know,
interesting. Okay.
Sufi Muslims, I guess, which is or a group. Anyway, there's 9 basic personality types, you'd call
Yeah.
them, and one of them is, I think, called the generalist.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, there's the generalist, there's the scientist, there's all these kind of different kind of viewpoints on
Yeah.
how it is, and you can even say countries are that way. Like
Mhm.
America is a very outgoing country versus Japan, which is a very standoffish country, and things like that. But one of the things in there, every personality type has strengths and weaknesses,
Oh, of course. Yes. Yes.
right? So just like someone who's very good socially.
Yeah.
Yeah, they may be very good at supporting you and giving you the emotional support and the like, but on the flip side, when they get very controlling, they use guilt trips and things like that. So it's like both sides of the same coin. Well,
Yeah.
I think the generalist, I think it was the generalist anyway. Their weakness is hedonism,
Oh, interesting.
and I've always associated with that because I can very easily get into something to the point where it's unhealthy the amount I get into.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Jordan Peterson talks about that. He goes, our society is becoming more hedonistic because we've got it so easy. It's like I got so much free time. It's like, okay, that's crazy, man. I'm telling you, porn is bad for you in a significant way, actually. But it's so freaking easy to get now,
Yep.
and it's
Well,
just bad.
Yeah, I remember the days of looking up dirty pictures on in the computer lab at UCLA, trying to figure out how to find this stuff. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, nowadays the stuff you find is just scary.
Yeah, it's always that because we always need, okay, that was good, but that was a great cookie, but can you put extra chocolate chips in it? Next time give me three cookies, right?
Well, so that's the
It
interesting
just
thing
doesn't
is
stop.
what what generates behavior is part of that is your focus. Where are you focusing on
Yeah, where
things?
you're
What are you
focused. Yeah.
seeing? That's what this guy Chase Hughes was talking about. But he said there's different ways to get people's attention, to get their focus, and
Yes.
one of them is novelty,
Oh,
something
yeah.
new and different.
Yes.
So this is like you go down the path of, ooh, I want a donut.
Yeah.
Ooh, I want a donut with maple on top.
Mhm.
And oh, let's put some bacon on that. And while we're at it, why don't we slap a couple of hamburger patties between two of them? And bit by bit, the novelty is pulling you along this path that you're now talking about something totally different than original. And that's what happens with porn, and that's what happened with drugs, and that's what happens with everything. And it's not always a pleasure sensational type of thing. It could be like mind candy or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. It could be
Yes.
anything that pulls you further and further into the rabbit hole.
Yes. Man, you got to be careful because that will it'll eat you alive, all that sort of, it's just unbelievable. Yeah. And I think you got to tell yourself no. But if you don't have God, you don't have the Bible, it's like you kind of don't have any frame of reference to compare things against, right?
We need to bring. I was talking to Jamar this week from our
Yeah.
Toastmasters group. I think we need to bring him on. I mentioned to him as well, and
Yeah.
he was interested in it. We got into a discussion of belief in God
Yes. Yeah.
versus religion.
Oh, yeah, yeah, totally different things. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and so he because I had called him a religious person at some point, and he
Oh,
said
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not. And so we had a whole discussion on what that means, and I
Yeah.
think that would be an interesting thing to talk about.
That would be
Because
fun to talk
he's
about.
very spiritual and he talks about God a lot, but he's not a religious person by that definition, which
And I
which I
guess
find.
religion is every man's attempt to get to God, maybe. I don't know. I think we're all a little bit.
Well, the idea is it depends. If you see religion as the church, if you see religion as the organization, which starts off as here, let me, you don't know how to read back in the 500 years ago time frame. Here
Yeah.
we got an educated guy who learns how to read. He can read and help you interpret the Bible. Great. That makes sense. At some point, though, the organization starts taking control
Yes. Right.
and suddenly it's not about the message from the Bible and being
Right.
interpreted for your
Right.
benefit. It's for the church making itself
Of
richer
course.
or getting political power or whatever, right? And
Of course.
I mean,
Yeah.
the church is like any other bureaucratic organization. The
Just
organization at some point gets its own life, right?
always. It just
So this
that
I've been
and
thinking. Go
yeah,
ahead.
this is going down. Okay, we're gonna go down a little bit of a rabbit hole actually, because this, from the Christian standpoint, man, and when I say man, I mean human beings, actually. If you look at the Greek word, it's actually closer to humans, right? But we say man, and women get all upset. I'm like, listen, chick, you gotta slow down. This doesn't mean man, it means you too. But yeah, we're inherently evil. Every single one of us has an evilness that if we're put in the right situation, that evil will come out.
Okay, not to get overly philosophical here, but
But let's do it. Come on, let's get overly philosophical.
no, are they intentionally evil or are they committing evil actions? Because someone who commits an evil action could be doing so for a good reason.
Well, I think it starts that way, but then eventually this power, it like corrupts the mind. It literally distorts your
Oh,
mind.
okay, but I think there's an ethical difference between someone who has a negative, bad, evil outcome with intention to do that versus someone who has that with the intention to actually follow some other principle.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, actually. So
Like
from the Bible,
I was thinking the Milgram experiment where they got people to shock
yeah, yeah,
other
yeah,
people by telling them no, you got to do it, you got to do it, you got to do it, right?
yeah, you got to do
And
it.
they
Yeah.
were submitting to authority,
Yes.
and they were doing that, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think they're, and they were doing things that would have killed people had it
Yes.
been a real
Yeah.
been a
Yeah.
reality.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so they were going down a path of I'm just following the
I'm
rules,
just
which
following
is
the
generally a
rules.
good thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it's the same with the. Have you seen the prison one too? I think they repeat that over and over and over again. Actually, they divide them
Which
up
one?
in like prisoners, and then I can't remember what it's called. And then they have the other that are the other group is like the warden and the people that are in control, and it always goes south. It's always it always ends up the same way with the same people, but the control people like just are using the prisoners actually. And I think it's just built into our human nature that we're kind of evil, which is really the story of the original sin that as soon as Eve in the garden ate from the tree of good and knowledge, it just changed mankind in a significant way that we can't unchange, actually. But we're going down a deeper, but this would be fun to talk about with Jamar, actually.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things though we were talking about is the organization's kind of growing out of control.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's what happens. Yeah.
This makes me think of Elon Musk and him wanting to trim the U.S. government.
Yes, right.
And so I was having a discussion with someone else about he says he can trim $2 trillion.
Yeah, but now he's saying one. Now he's saying we can't.
Now, so the idea is where are you going to get $2 trillion? Given those numbers I just read to you,
Yeah,
there isn't $2 trillion to cut
no,
without
that's
cutting
why you
some of
build
these
it
things
down.
that you've promised people,
Yeah,
right? So
right.
you want to cut Social Security, yeah, you can find $2 trillion. You don't want to cut Social Security, you're not going to be able to do it. So um, now I think there actually is $2 trillion there, but you're only going to get half a trillion easily, and
Yeah,
then the rest of it's going to come with major change, and you're going to have
major
to spend
change.
money to make that change.
Yeah, right,
So you
right.
have to spend money to save money in this
Yeah,
case, and
yeah.
it's worth it. But
Long term, maybe. Yeah.
I think it is worth it in the long term to do because the government I think is bloated and needs to be,
Oh,
you know,
massively bloated. Yeah,
like any gardener knows, you
yeah.
don't let the tree grow crazy. My citrus tree has way too many branches. This winter, I'm cutting off some of the branches so it'll focus its growth in the areas I want it to grow in.
Right, right, right. Exactly.
The government meaning the leadership, which would be the executive branch, needs
Yeah,
to come in and say, this is how we need the government to grow in the future. These are
yeah.
the things it needs to be doing. These are where it needs to concentrate. And we're going to make sure that the resources are focused on A, B, and C, not on A through Z.
Well, yeah, getting people to agree on A, B, and C is next to impossible is the problem.
Yeah, but that's leadership.
I
Right?
know.
And so this is the issue this is the issue I think Trump's going to have a problem with is because his style of leading is just telling people what to do.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, right.
It's not going to work for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's not going to work actually. Yeah, and that is the fear of Trump. That's my fear of Trump actually. He's coming in like a bulldog, like a bull in a china closet. And most people in the US said that's okay, right? Because the problem is worse than the bull. And oh my God, there's going to be problems from the bull, but it's like the problem is so bad, we got to release the bull at this point, to break some stuff.
You
Like I just hope he doesn't break it too much, is my concern.
So the concern that a lot of people on the left had was that he won't give up power once he's done.
Yeah, but that's okay, whatever. That's like irrational because he has to, right? It's impossible for him to not. It's impossible for him to keep going because in order for him to do that, he'd have to get a constitutional amendment put in, which I think
Oh
is.
no, to do it legally, it's impossible. The
Oh,
question is,
he
could
just
he
do
do
it
it
now?
illegally?
Oh
He
God,
could he
no,
do it
no,
illegally?
no, 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 no,
What
not
would stop it?
the rest of the country, everybody else. I mean, it's just the military. I mean, there's no way.
So in other words, we would have to get to a point where some of the military would knowingly go against orders.
Of course,
We
yeah,
would have to get to the point where the governors would step in and the local
yes.
National Guard would step in. We'd have to get to that point. So in other words, there'd be death.
Know that there'd be death,
I think there'd
but
be
I think
death.
I think what it might be is there'd be a couple of dudes come in and come with me, Trump. Like you're almost eight. What is it? He's going to be like 85 years old.
So I think that's no
It's
that to
not
me
going to be much of a
is the
fight.
most realistic thing. Is like even if he were to seize power, as long as he didn't pass it on to one of his kids, we'd be fine.
There's not going to be much of a fight or whatever like that. I don't even think I know I hear people saying that, and maybe I'm naive, but I'm thinking that to me it is impossible scenario. It's like that would never happen.
So my worry is less about him and more about the people around him.
Well, yeah, okay.
All right, because at the end of the day, he says a lot of stuff that he does not mean or believe, in my opinion, which I don't like because it makes it hard to read him. But that's what he wants. He doesn't
But
want to
that's
be
his deal. That's his negotiation. I heard Kevin O'Leary say, yeah, he makes these what is it, bambastic or bamboo, whatever, just
bombastic.
bombastic. These just crazy claims. But here's why it works though, is because wait a minute, that son of a bitch is crazy. He might actually go do that, you know?
So we're going to take over Canada and Greenland. We're going to take back the Panama Canal, and we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America.
Now I think he'll probably do the Gulf of America. I mean, he
Well,
can
yeah, the rest of the world doesn't care. They'll call it the Gulf of Mexico still. We'll call it the Gulf of America. No big deal, right? I
taking
mean,
over Canada. Not so sure about that actually.
that won't happen, but I'm sure we'll get some kind of concessions out of them
Of course, that's the whole thing.
The interesting thing is taking over another country like Greenland, which is a country, but it's also part of Denmark. So that's an interesting aspect right there. It's only 50,000 people. I mean, we could, that's less than we get like in a month of people crossing the border. So we should be able to absorb that. No, and the first time he said that, take over Greenland back when he was president last time, it was like everyone's going, "What the heck is he talking? What is this Greenland thing?" Right? And yet I've heard some geopolitical people talk about it, going, it kind of makes sense. With Russia being unpredictable,
Yeah.
having another base. I mean, I think we have bases in Iceland, but having another place in the Pacific to base military out of makes a lot of sense. It's also got a huge amount of resources if we ever needed them.
Yeah, right.
And I kind of get it. But man, it's an off the wall idea.
It is bombastic. Yeah, it's I don't know. I don't think it'll happen. But you know what the idea though is let's say I'm asking you for money. I go, Chris, I have a charity. Could you give me $1,000 right now? You're gonna
No,
think
I get it. Yeah.
I'm like, okay, Chris. How about $10 then? And you'll be like, fine.
But that's the thing, right? We're gonna put 25% tariffs on everything. That gets everyone to the table because they don't want to be tariffed
That
25%.
gets everyone to the table. That's all he's doing. You got to read his book, The Art of the Deal. It's all laid out in there. It's like it's just but here's the thing though. He's got that wild card where that son of a bitch is crazy. He just may actually go do that.
Well, so one of the things, so over the past several months, I've gotten to be more and more apprehensive, and it's not the word I want, suspicious of mainstream media, right? So for years we've been being told mainstream media is telling us the wrong thing.
They're a disaster, yeah.
But then I told you the whole thing where I calculated out the Kamala Harris lead of 0.2% or whatever it worked out, and I said California by itself should make it like a 3% lead across the country. So the fact that she's only got a 0.2% lead across the country means she's lost already.
Yeah.
And no one was mentioning this. No one was talking about that because it's not by popular vote. It's by electoral vote, which is definitely going to be more weighted evenly than that. But when I heard that, I'm like, okay, so basically people are either lying to me or they're purposely misunderstanding this or they're dumb and they don't understand this. It's one of those things, right?
Yeah, there's a fourth option. They actually believe that's the truth,
That's even worse.
Okay, I think that's the actual truth. I believe that's true, actually.
But okay, so okay, I'm going to diverge back to critical thinking here.
Okay, go back. Okay.
So they're not doing critical thinking at all because for them to not see these pieces of information, like I going on to ChatGPT, which only gave me limited information because they don't want to give you information about the election because they're afraid you're going to use misinformation. Yeah, I was able to put together that the Biden beat Trump in the prior election by 15 million votes.
Yeah.
15 million votes. 5 million of those votes came from California being, more Democrat than Republican, which means a third of, and I think it was 10%. So 3% of the popular vote was for the Democrats the prior time, and it was all because of California, that 3% of the 10% difference. Which means if she's only ahead by 0.2%, California by itself should give her a 3% popular vote lead, and it didn't. This is just, your pundits, the people who examine this stuff should be aware of this. And the fact that they're not means they're crap at their job.
No. They are so bias, they can't believe any other possibility exists. I think that's what's actually happening.
Um, well, okay, but where I was going with this originally was another fact came up this last week that made me think I've been I've been being I've been told the wrong thing or the misleading thing by media for even longer.
Of course,
And
yeah.
this was, if you remember, in the last time Trump was president, he went into NATO and said, "You're all going to have to put up more money
Yeah,
because
right,
you're paying it. We're paying the bulk
right,
of it."
right.
And I'm like, "Oh gosh, he's being pushy, blah blah blah. It's Trump, whatever." And he got them to pony up more money, right?
Yeah.
But then I found out in a reporting this week, they were saying that according to the NATO agreement, the contract itself, the treaty, every member of NATO is supposed to be putting, I think, 3% of
I
their,
heard two, but maybe three, two or yeah, 2%.
yeah,
Yeah,
into NATO,
yeah.
and they weren't even doing that
They
much.
weren't
So
right, right?
him coming in and arguing that they should be doing this amount of money actually had legal, I don't know if a treaty is
Yeah,
considered legal, but
yeah,
legal backing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it wasn't just him being noisy and boisterous as he
Right,
always is.
right.
And the fact that I, who pay attention to the news, did not know that
Yeah,
caught me by surprise. And I'm like, okay, that should have been something that was fed to me in the news as part of the news story because it's a relevant fact. Yes, he's being noisy and boisterous and making demands of our allies, but at the same time, this is where it's coming from.
yeah.
And
But
so that's another thing, Mike. Like, you're telling me just enough to make me think a negative thing about someone who's doing something in a pushy way, but it's backed by something there. There's something that they're backing it. So,
well, it's called confirmation bias, right? And they actually believe it, 100% true. Actually, they
well,
believe.
they fed my confirmation bias that he's just being a jerk and noisy.
Well, but that's what they see. That's what they believe. So then they have to have supporting data that supports that position. Actually, it's
There
pretty
was a
simple.
time,
Actually,
we used you used to have to fight. We used to search for a way to survive, right? Because that was the way the world was.
yeah,
And now that we don't have to anymore because there's abundance throughout the world or
yeah,
throughout our world
right,
at least.
right, right.
Now everyone's searching for meaning, which means they're tying themselves to some identity. This is who I am. This is how
Yes,
I am.
yes,
And that means that everything you see has an automatic filter in place to be interpreted one way or another.
100% true. Actually, yep, 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 yep.
It takes us. So maybe this is another skill that needs to be part of critical thinking is self-awareness. Know who you are because that helps you understand your bias.
Yes, yeah, 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 exactly. Like, let me go back. Two things, right? Two things.
Yep.
Always Christianity, God and jujitsu, right? Um, it's the same thing though, because with jujitsu, I'm biased to solve problems through some form of grappling, right? That's how I
Mhm.
do things. As opposed to if I studied karate a lot, you'd be think kicking and punching is the answer to solve problems. It's just, it's just what I've been taught, you know?
But are they different? I mean, yes, the
Yes,
technique is
yes, of
different.
course, yeah.
The technique is different, but the mindset.
I don't know that the mindset is different. It's just a different set of tools,
So
right?
back to tools again.
Just a different set of tools. I mean, jujitsu is basically just a series of techniques, and everything is very much like you do this, I do that, and then you do that, and this is my counter to the counter to the counter to the counter, and it's
So,
just that's it.
can we say any discipline? Can we say karate, fencing, pottery?
Sure, yeah, no, no, there's a certain set of techniques to solve this particular problem, actually. Yeah, 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 exactly.
and,
And
and and solving a problem requires you to recognize there's a problem, to
yes,
diagnose the problem,
yeah,
to theorize ways to address to break out the pieces of the problem, to theorize ways to address that, and then to take action and fix those,
yes,
and then to review and see if they actually worked, and if they didn't, go back and
yes,
do
yeah.
the process again.
AKA the scientific method, right? Not science, because science is a religion, but
Scientific method.
but the scientific method, this process that we use.
Scientific method is we need to take the word science out of it because I think that's hurting it actually.
Yeah, it's just some
The
sort of
scientific method is the method by which life gets better.
I would reframe it to this is the way that we understand truth, right? And the truth is what's actually happening, right?
Yeah. Again, there's something about using the word truth,
I know, I know.
and
I'm
it's
with
it's
you.
it's that facts and truth.
Yeah.
To me, the facts are something measurable that we should be able to agree on,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Even though that comes more into question today than ever before.
Yeah.
Truth is the interpretation we put on that. So the closer we can get that interpretation to the fact with very little interpretation, the more we agree on it. The more interpretation that gets put on those facts, the less and less we agree on it because we get further and further from the fact.
Yeah, yeah, I know. So when I'm learning Greek, the head teacher dude, his name's Daryl. I asked him like, why is there so many issues of interpretation with the Bible, right? And he's like, well, there's two main reasons. One is just ignorance. People just don't know, right? They heard it sometime, they just don't know any better, which is a big one. And the second one is just their lens they view things through, their culture they view things through. And it's like to get somebody to break out of what their culture is that they believed for 40 years is just that's really hard if impossible to do.
But I mean, I was just thinking of Isaac Newton and the apple, right?
Yeah.
So the apple falls, there's
Yeah.
gravity. Did Isaac Newton say apples fall down? No, he said things fall down. He
Yeah,
extrapolated
yeah,
from it,
yeah, right,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
So he took a step away from it. But let's say he were to look at a feather and a gust of wind came by and blew it up in the air, and then
Yeah.
eventually it fell down. Well, feathers represent angels, and they're pure and better and good, and they go higher up in the air because they want to be closer to
Yes.
God. But
Yeah.
eventually they do come down.
Did you come down?
I mean, that would be an interpretation of a fact. We saw that the feather went up and then down,
That would
right?
be and we advance ourselves all the time because I think
Is
Newton.
that truth, though? Is what I said truth?
Ooh, that's interesting. That's a good question.
Because it's backed by the fact of what I saw. I added in a bunch of crap that was not part of what we saw.
Well, let's go back to your constraints. Inside of this set of constraints, that's 100% true. For instance, like Newton's laws of motion, it's like, man, we can get around the solar system great with his laws, right? But when you start going near the speed of light, all sorts of weird shit happens. So
Mhm.
inside this constraint, in fact, what if you look at the equations, you set the speed to zero, you'll come out with those equations, basically, right? But when you
But
start moving faster, yeah, but now the box is bigger, so it's like, oh,
so my box had in it the fact that the feather went up and then
yeah,
down,
the feather went up.
right? Then I added in angels and good and evil and all that stuff, which wasn't in the fact that we saw. So if we were to constrain it further and we were just to leave it to what was in the what we saw, and we say the feather went up when the wind hit it
Yeah,
and later came down.
yeah, right. That's what
If
happened.
I say that, you can agree with that, and then we could say that is the truth.
That's
Because
what we observed. That's
right,
something
so
we.
that's what we're interpreting from what we saw. The fact that's our interpretation of what we saw.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I
Right?
would take that out, but I'd say we saw that, right?
Yeah, we saw that, but
Yeah,
the point is, someone else saw something else. We don't know, but you and I saw that, and we tried to constrain the definition, the explanation, so close to the fact of what we saw that we come to agreement on it.
yeah, we would agree that the feather went up and then it came down. Now, we don't know why it went up and why it came down, but it did, right?
But then let's say I'm able to observe, oh, a gust of wind hit at the same time,
Yeah,
and somehow the feather got pushed up by the gust of
yes.
wind.
Yes, right.
Then we can start putting things together and extrapolate that things fall down, but sometimes forces like the wind
Yes, right.
can make it go against gravity,
There's other forces, yeah.
right? So by putting together these different facts that we've interpreted as the truth of the fact, maybe there's the truth of the fact.
Yeah, right.
We constrain the truth of the fact to be as close to the fact as possible
Yeah.
so that there's very little interpretation.
Yeah, yeah.
And we put a bunch of those together, and then we start to extrapolate meaning and understanding by how those things fit
Yeah,
together.
what does it mean?
And
Those are
then
very
yeah,
different questions.
and then we start getting away from measurable truth, and we start getting into deduced truth
Yeah,
or whatever. And at that point, as long as you and I are in alignment on all the facts, there's a good chance, using logic, that we can come to agreement on the what we extrapolate from that. But if you come at it from a totally different belief system than I do, or a principle system than I do, you might not come up with the same viewpoint of that
You may
extrapolating.
not. Yeah. And I think that's a good definition for the truth is that we both agree that that's true. There's agreement. So we call that the truth.
Which is why language is so important, because when you redefine words without agreement, there's no more truth in the word. We no
Yeah.
longer agree on the definition of the word, therefore there's no truth in what that word means.
That's interesting.
Right? Because
So there's
if truth is agreement and you and I don't agree on what a word means,
then
then
we
there's no
can't
truth
call
there.
that truth. No. And then what we do is we start saying, well, there's like the truth, and then there's my truth, right?
But for us to to trust each other, we need to have a shared understanding of things, and that means that we have to have enough ability to communicate ideas and thoughts that we can show the agreement. And if we don't
Yes,
have
yes, yes, yes.
agreement on what words mean, it makes it very hard for us to build that trust.
Impossible. That's why in engineering science is like the words have a very particular meaning, actually. Like if you measure something and you say it's 12 feet long, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's 12 feet. But then I'm going to come back and say, well, Chris, it's 12 feet, but there's got to be some plus or minus in there because I don't think it's possible to have exactly 12 feet. So, which side of the line was that on? Was it the left side, the right side, the center of the line? If we made the line thinner and thinner and thinner, is it still 12 feet? It's like, so there's also, right? I mean, it's like how precise is that measurement?
My daughter had to cut a piece of wood. She's this week. She's making a shadow box for my wife to show off some
Yeah,
tchotchkes. And she made one last week with my help, and this week I had her do it on her own because I showed
yeah.
her how to do it last week. And so she drew the lines of where she wanted to do the cuts. And then she did one cut. I said, okay, make sure you line that up exactly where you want the cut, because the saw is a certain width by
Sure.
itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And she didn't do that, so one ended up being slightly longer than the other, so the shelf was not even.
Yeah, right.
And I said, this is why I mentioned it. Look, when you cut on the line versus to the left of the line or to the right of the line, it's going to be a difference by the width of that
Yes,
saw.
correct. Yeah, yeah.
And it's something, it's that extra piece of knowledge. It's that extra thing that makes it depends.
It
Right?
depends.
If you cut on the line, is it going to be the same? Well, if you cut it identically, yes, it is. But so it depends. If you don't set it up, if you cut to the left of the line, to the right of the line, it's one of those things that it's a piece of information that will clarify, but it doesn't mean anything until you get agreement on the top level
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, because then you have to come back to some sort of variable thing as well. How true is it? I mean, because the reality is we could be using a different tape measure. When you're marking, what's the width of the pencil? Are you marking on the left of the line, the right of the line? I mean, there is a lot of tolerance stacking that this
Well,
thing
the
operates.
tape measure has the little hook at the end, right?
Yeah, right.
And sometimes that comes loose.
Yeah.
And so suddenly that's an eighth of an inch leeway right there.
Well, no, the end of the tape measure, that's really important because if you notice it wiggles, it goes back and forth actually. And
Mhm.
that's for if you're pushing it up, it moves in. And if you're pulling on something, so it should move exactly the width of the piece of the metal on the hook on the end.
Mm.
It's designed that way
That's the philosophy behind it, at least, huh?
to take out that air, to minimize the air. But this is when you come into machining, everything is tolerances.
Oh, you're
Nothing.
talking when you're talking hundredths of an inch, and doing mil spec cuts and the like.
It's always about I want this 7 inches plus or minus some tolerance, right? And the tighter the tolerance, the more you pay because it's harder
What
to.
was the Mark Wahlberg movie where he was a sniper? And
I remember that.
yeah, and they blame him for having shot the president or somebody.
Okay,
They blame him for having shot some political official, and they bring him in front of the gun, and he puts a bullet in the gun, and it won't fire because he's changed out the firing pin so that it can't be fired.
gotcha. Yeah,
Right? And so it's millimeters or no, microns, I guess, off, but it won't fire.
it won't fire. Yeah, yeah. But I love engineering though because engineering is so precise. I love it because because you there California, I can have a tape measure here. And as long as we're referring back to a known reference standard, there's got to be some certifying organization that says, yes, we looked at all the tape measure and we approve that when you measure 12 feet, it's 12 feet plus or minus some amount. And we're going, that's close enough for what we're building,
But
close.
that's the thing that's amazing, right? You measure the dimensions of the room you're sitting in,
Yeah,
and you will find a quarter inch, maybe even a half an inch of variance between the angles of the
of
walls and how it's
course.
built.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
you measure the pyramids,
yeah,
and you're talking something massive that has, less than an eighth of an inch, less than a 16th of an inch
yeah.
variance. That's just freaking amazing.
Tighter tolerances, right? Because the smaller the tolerance, the harder it is to do, equal more expensive. I
Yeah.
know my uncle was he was making something for like a long time ago, and they were calling out like he didn't know what it was, but it was a tube, and the internal diameter of the tube had to be like plus or minus a tenth of a millimeter some crazy small little number, right? Or whatever like that. And so they spent all this money designing this tube, and then later he decided that, oh, this is the tube that the pee goes down for the astronauts. He's like, why are we holding such tight tolerances? It's not required. And
So they
so
can spend more money.
they could spend more money. That's how you get a $200 P tube, right?
Hmm.
When it should be 50 cents. But yeah, that's why it's good. So I think in terms of logic, we have to be very precise. We have to be very careful to define terms so that when I say a word, the same picture will pop in your head. Because if we don't, that's an equivocation problem, and that's usually the problem in arguments.
I think that's why we can have conversations so well because we're already relatively aligned on a lot of this language, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Have you ever been like so? I don't know when the last time you sat in an office cubicle was, but I remember sitting in office
Oh, yeah.
cubicles, listening to people talk and argue, and immediately seeing that they're not talking about the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, right. Exactly. It's like exactly. And my first thought is both you're idiots.
I'm like, you're like arguing this point, and you're arguing that point, and no one sees it. I'm like, should I bring it up?
I know. I know, and that's why it's so common. Like when I was debugging or trying to fix a problem, so comfortably, oh, I'm seeing this thing, and I'm like, okay, what do you see? Wait, let's go on Zoom. We didn't have Zoom then, but I just like walk over. Show me. I need to show you to show me what you're seeing, actually. In fact, I just had it the other day with one of my clients. He's like, I can't log in. I need my password to log in. I don't know what it is. Well, she was logged in. What she meant when she said this, I don't know how to upload a video to YouTube was the actual problem, not I don't know how to log in. But she thought logging in was equivalent to uploading a video. I'm like, well, that's a very different problem.
You remember the old things about people putting whiteout on the screen to correct, or using the old CD tray as a cup holder, and
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know how much of that was urban myth, but yeah.
yeah. And that's one of the things I'm sure it's like every good lie is based on some sort of truth. But this is why Navy SEALs practice so much. It's like it's shoot, move, communicate, right? Communication is key a key way, and a lot of it's nonverbal, and it's because this guy was telling me how they clear a room, and ultimately at the end, it's like if they clear sectors, and if they cross their laser beams, that means everything's cleared. So that means I've cleared this and you've cleared that. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, this room is now clear, right? Definitively 100% clear.
A big part of the ability to align and communicate, and particularly in groups like that work together so much, is it doesn't matter what my definition of a word is. If I
No,
understand your definition of a word and I can use that in conversation, then we can
yes,
communicate. So,
yeah,
like, I don't expect every soldier or every person on a team to think the exact same way.
no, you
I
don't have
expect
to.
them to be able to think the same way when
Yes,
necessary. That's
yes,
a different thing. It doesn't mean you give up your own opinion, your own thoughts, your own ideas. But
yes,
when someone else is the lead, the owner, the decision maker,
yes.
and needs something done, you're all able to align and act in a way that works with that decision.
Yes, yes, that's called consensus. That's called that I don't necessarily agree with you, but for the sake of the team, I'm going to do that thing that you said.
I used to think like I don't know if I mentioned this to you. So I was trying to get promoted at my old job, and I wasn't able to get much traction. Then I broke my wrist in a motorcycle accident, and so I had to carpool with my boss.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
And being in the car for 3 hours a day for 3 months with my boss, or I think it
Yeah.
was 3 months or whatever, however long it was, my boss learned how I think, and I learned how my boss thinks.
Yes. Right.
And after that, I got promoted very quickly because my boss could trust me
Yes.
not to do something stupid that would go against her
Yep.
goals.
Yep. 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 And in
Right?
that case, trust meant she was able to predict what you're going to do.
Yeah, she knew that she understood the my thinking, and I understood her thinking. And so what I noticed after that was a team that works together can can help fill the gap when someone's missing.
Oh
So
my
let's
gosh.
say you've got one person on the team who's responsible for X, and
Yes.
they're sick, they're gone, they're whatever, they're not available.
Yes.
And someone from outside the team comes, we need a decision on this now, and that's the responsibility of X.
Yeah.
Well, they're not there. But you
Yeah.
know what? If the rest of the team has worked with them enough, they could say, well, he's not here today or she's not here today, but this is what you can do.
Of course. Right.
And it'll be the right answer because they're aligned.
It'll be the right answer.
It's amazing when you see a team that's aligned, and I think that's what you're getting when you get a special forces group or any kind of team that's been together. This is why in person is actually important for so much of this, to
Oh,
be around each other, to see the nuances. It's not just what you and I are sharing right this moment. It's the body language. It's the stuff that's going on the side that you're not going to see in Zoom, that it really helps to
yeah.
build an understanding of a
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, because there's more information gets transmitted, right? That's why we love in-person stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, phone
No,
you get good, and we get good, but yeah.
and this is the thing I have with the whole, why I understand the return to office that so many people like Amazon, I think, announced this week that everyone's going back to the
Yeah.
office. It's the idea that, you know, being in the same room with someone is a totally different dynamic than not.
Totally different. Right.
And when you're firefighting, you want to
Yes.
be incident commanders, when they have their incident management teams, they want everyone in the same place to figure crap out.
Yeah. Yep. 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 Yep.
You don't want to be sitting there waiting for Zoom calls and all the delays that happen and internet outages and stuff like that. You want to figure things out.
Because information flows more freely. I mean, you get so much more input. Like right now, I get a limited input. I can only see the little rectangle, right? Now I happen to know what's on the left and right just because you've shown me before. But without that knowledge, I wouldn't know. I just see this, right? That's all I
Every
see.
time you see me look over here, I'm looking out the window,
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Because I'm hearing noises out there. I'm looking to see if there's something out there.
And I know there's the windows, but I can derive that because I can see where the light is. I can see the reflections, how the light falls on your face or whatever. Just because I'm trained to like look at light that way. I don't think the average person would maybe not know that, you know?
But so, a lot of people poo-poo the idea of companies making us go back to the office and the like.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I think to some extent there is this idea that you can do your work individually from anywhere. And there is work that can be
It
done
depends on
individually,
what work it is. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
but there's some work that needs interaction.
Yes. Yes.
And unless you're going to be on Zoom for probably twice as much as you need to be if you were
Yeah.
in person makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sucks for the people who have to drive to get to the place to be in
Sucks.
person.
But you get more information. Yeah. And I think the right thing is what's the right balance? Because a lot of times you need to meet with others, but then there's times you just need to work solo, right? If you're like writing or something, you just need a block of 3 or 4 hours of quiet to write, and then you need to come back. Like programming is really like that. Programming is a solo sport.
Yeah, I think that's one of the limitations of it. So,
Yeah.
in
But
many
in
ways,
that case, Zoom could work better because you can pull screens up like side by side, and I think in certain cases for certain things, Zoom is actually works better than in person.
if you're doing collective work,
Yeah, if you're doing collective work, right?
yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
that's. Although, if you're as long as everyone on the call is active.
Yeah,
When you start getting people who aren't active and they don't share their screen or they don't share their camera, and then it's just a distraction. You're trying to multitask
distraction.
and do
Yeah,
five things at
yeah.
once. So,
Well, and I think it's having a clear understanding of the tool, what it can do well, its strengths and its weaknesses. So you're starting to really understand the nature of this tool, right? What it can do and what it can't do. I think that's really important. But that takes a
today,
lot of
today
time.
I reviewed a speech. Clement gave a speech, and he was using presentation software, so he was using slides, right?
Yeah, right.
So I had all kinds of commentary because one of the problems I have is because our Toastmasters meetings are Zoom.
Yes.
people resort to using slides a lot,
Okay, yeah.
which to me is somewhat against the idea of public speaking.
Okay.
A presentation is a very particular type of public speaking,
Yes.
and you can hide behind the slides. You can
Yeah.
hide behind the information, the content in there.
Yeah.
Whereas the actual skill of public speaking to me goes in that storytelling and the connection. It's in areas that don't require that. So anytime I get feedback says, "Oh, it'd be great if you added a graphic here or added a picture here," I'm like, I'm purposely not doing that in
Yeah.
many cases.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a presentation and you need to show that information,
Yeah.
right? Particularly if it's in an area where people don't know and just showing them a picture helps them understand.
Yeah. 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 It's just really coming down to you got to know your tool and what it can do and what it can't do, actually. Here's the problem though. Like if all you got is a hammer, wait, no, what is it? Yeah. Yeah. If all you got is a hammer, like everything looks like a nail, you know?
But then you need to start crafting some other tools.
I know, I know, I know. Sometimes there's a screwdriver, sometimes there's a this, sometimes there's this.
So, well, I mean, so the speech that I gave last week, was it?
Yeah,
The one
that was
I'm
really
doing?
that was your best speech ever, just so you know.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I got a lot of input from that. And
Yeah,
honestly, it hit me giving the speech. I wasn't emotional at all coming up with a speech, but when I gave it, it
yeah.
hit me. Um, but it's one of the things I'm trying to do this year is to be much more able to express emotion
Yes,
than,
yes.
than normal because I do think that's one thing that I'm weak on. I go to the analysis side of things way
Yeah,
too quick.
right.
But I even got a feedback in that saying, "Oh, it would have been great to see a picture or something like that." And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know if it would have had the same message if I showed you a picture.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. That's
You
why
you,
books are
you
better.
build it in your mind.
Yes,
This is
exactly.
my whole argument of when you watch a movie, you're seeing the director's interpretation of a story. When
Yeah.
you read the story, it's your story.
Yeah, yeah. That's almost always true. Almost because like one thing when you're doing a horror flick, you never want to show the monster. Well, you show it eventually, but
Hmm.
you want to delay it because they're gonna fill in the worst possible thing for them.
Yep.
And just like with your wife or anybody, in the absence of perfect communication, the other person's always gonna go to the worst possible scenario. It's just the way we work as humans. So in that case, showing the picture could have weakened the speech. But for them, maybe you didn't. But for them, maybe you didn't use enough words to create the image in their mind. Maybe that's why they were saying that. It would be really interesting to dig into like, why are you showing? Is it just you just that's the first thing I had? I need to see a picture, or you didn't you couldn't see the picture? It's like I'd like to know what
So,
are
well,
they
some
seeing?
people really are picture oriented or visual oriented, right? It's like
I
we all
am
have different
very
ways of
visual.
learning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But if you explain something to me with enough information, my mind will fill it in.
yeah. Everybody will do that. Yes. Will you fill in what I want you to fill in is the question. Sometimes, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know. I know I've watched movies and we got like literally the person was sitting next to me and we got like totally different. I'm like, were we watching the same movie? It's like,
Really? Huh.
I've had that happen a bunch of times because I just got a whole different message out of it than they did.
There have been movies that I've rewatched, yeah, with my daughter.
Yeah,
Things that I liked growing up or I liked years ago, and we've watched it with her, and I realized she doesn't get the message. Part of it is because contextually the world has changed
yeah,
in 20 some odd years,
yeah,
right? 3 years.
yeah,
It's not the same world that I was living in at the time, just technology and other things, the way, um, the fact that cell phones may not have existed or social media didn't exist or the
yeah,
internet wasn't what it was today, some of the things may not have made any sense.
yeah. Right, right. Because you didn't have the context for it. Yeah, yeah, which is so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we need to wrap up, Chris.
Okay.
I'm
I
getting
think
kind
so.
of tired. I thought this was a pretty darn good, pretty darn good like podcast actually. This is podcast number 6, just so you know.
Yeah.
Um, just so you know
So,
too, our New Year's podcast, whenever we did last time, is going live. I have it scheduled for Sunday,
okay.
so it's coming out I think 10 a.m. on Sunday. Um, so what do we need to do next time? Or what are we going to talk about next time? Are we going to try to get a guest on next time? What are we
So
gonna?
I think we can, if we can try to get a guest on, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, yeah.
Jamar was willing to talk about kind of the religion versus belief in God and kind of spirituality
Oh,
aspect of it.
perfect. That would be a fun conversation, actually.
Uh, Dan really likes to talk about personal growth and
Awesome.
like and that's his thing. And we went on, we were talking. He called me to ask me something, and then we ended up talking for an hour on stuff like this. Again, delving into a lot of this type of thing.
Yeah.
And then Tony, I was talking to, and yeah, he was kind of impacted by the fires. He has a couple of Airbnb units that he's got going
Oh, okay, okay.
Hollywood area. So, but that's why he couldn't do it today. But he's willing to talk, and he wants to talk about. He'd love to talk about AI. Actually, he has an idea of talking about AI, EQ, and IQ, and how they all fit together.
Oh, that's be fascinating. I have no idea what he's going to see, but that I'd be love to. Hopefully, he's can paint a picture that I'll understand somehow. I can, 'cause the problem is when somebody describes something like that, it's like you can't unsee it. You're like, oh my gosh, now I can never not see. Do you know what I'm talking about, or am I just
Yeah, yeah,
rambling?
no, no. To me, I'm like, right now we've got so many AIs out there, but so Dan and I were talking. Dan's got all of these journals from his dad. His dad journaled every year of his life after
Oh
like
my gosh, that's awesome.
and he's like, and I told him about Notebook LM, and he's like, if I were to digitize all of these and put them into Notebook LM, could I create is it simulacrum? What is it? A copy of my dad. And I'm like, I don't know that it would be
Okay.
exactly like, but if you got recordings of voice and stuff, I think you could. But even if not, even if you just took all of his knowledge from his journals and put them into Notebook LM, I think you could ask it then questions, and
That
you would
is
get.
a fascinating thing.
I'm fascinated. Imagine what you could do for your kids. You
Yeah,
just record yourself thinking and talking and singing and doing whatever in
yeah,
day-to-day life, and you upload that to an AI tool, and it goes through there and it puts together your beliefs, your ideas, your
yeah.
thoughts, and then you can ask it a question. It's like, what would my dad say about?
Yeah, that's really something we've never had access to before. Before it was always just stories. Oh, tell me a story of dad, right, or something.
Well, actually, so all of this has gotten me thinking about. I won't call it a pet peeve, but an interest of mine is institutional knowledge. When we talk about companies, we talk about the fact that they hire the young person to get rid of the old person who costs more money, but you lose the institutional knowledge. You lose
Yeah,
the stuff that's
yeah,
in the person's mind. And
yeah,
it's one of the hardest things it's always been is to get institutional knowledge out of heads and
yeah,
into whatever. And I
yeah,
was just thinking, if you were building a knowledge base for a company, how much knowledge exists in people's heads that isn't available for the AI?
yeah,
And I
yeah.
was thinking that would be a great service to offer. And that may be one. It's one I'm thinking of right now. Is maybe coming up with methodology and how do you capture institutional knowledge?
How do you capture that? That's so interesting. How do you?
Because I was just thinking, yeah, wouldn't it be so? We could do that with your dad. We could do that with someone in your family, or with a person with a personality. But could we also do that? I mean, if you were to go out and take all the videos of Elon Musk and put them out and put them into an AI, what would come out of it? Right? It would be an interesting thing. But even if it's just from the company, it's like, oh, I've got all these policies and procedures, and I've got these sales figures, and then I got all these emails between all the people within the company, and you feed that in, and it's like, okay, now I'm going to go talk to the guy who runs the operations. I'm going to go talk to the guy who runs the repair shop. I'm going to go talk to these people who probably don't document everything they do and
Or,
get them. Let's interview them. Let's talk to them. How did you do this? What was the hardest thing that happened? What was the most surprising thing? What is the thing that if you could fix would improve operations immediately? You ask those questions and you get input that then goes into an AI. Now you can ask it questions that are much more complex and much more nuanced.
yeah,
The guy who's been there 5 years has 5 years experience. The guy who's been there 20 has 20 years. He's going to have seen things that the 5 year guy hasn't seen.
absolutely. That's fascinating. Maybe I should start a whole series going down AI because AI is a big deal, actually. I intend to like actually learn a lot about AI this year. Um,
So,
that'd
so
be
the question I have, and maybe it's something we can, I don't know if we're going to start with this or whatever, but I actually typed in, can I create an AI of myself? And I noticed it must not be being asked because the answers I got were, yes, you can create an AI. Saying, yeah, I can go create AIs, but that's not the same thing. Of myself is what's missing in there.
yeah, yeah, right. That's interesting. That's
Because
fascinating.
imagine if every day you just took notes, audio notes, and you just recorded them every day, and you popped them into you dumped them into an AI somewhere, and every day it got knew a little bit more about you.
Well, I mean, this is kind of the essence of the whole Obsidian second brain Spartan Notes concept, right? Is that you build this second brain, but you're doing it for yourself and manually doing it so you can start to see relationships and recall things that you didn't even know you knew. So you're asking kind of an AI to be literally like the second brain, kind of like what we're trying to do in a manual way, but in a much more automated way.
But in the second brain ideas, you're freeing up space in your brain by dumping static information,
Yeah,
static stuff
right.
into it, and you create rules for how to operate it so that you don't doesn't take any of your decision power to do it,
Yeah,
right?
right.
You could do that with AI today. So what I'm talking about is actually creating an AI that can predict how you think, right? An AI that can mimic your values.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I think that's totally possible.
I don't think the AI can have your values because it's all in the programming.
Whether it's a good thing or
Oh,
bad thing, that's a different
so
question.
no, I forgot I wrote this down, and this is one thing we do need to talk about as well. Eventually, is AI is the epitome of logic. It's missing the other half of humanity, which is the feelings. Is this going to burn us? Because if you want to give feelings to AI, it's all in the programming. It's not in the biochemical coding of the way it's built. You and I are humans, and biochemically, we feel certain ways. When you see a puppy, when you see a little baby, there's certain emotions and feelings that come out because we're biochemically designed to do that.
Yeah.
AI doesn't work that way. And I don't think we understand ourselves. I don't think we understand humans well enough
Oh gosh, no,
to build
no.
that into an AI, which means that AI is going to stay heavily logic centered for a long time, if not forever. And
Mm,
what does that mean for a balanced output? Right now, we've been heavily logic for a couple of centuries, and now the emotions are coming in and they're kind of weighing too heavily. But we're always a balance between emotion and logic in
always the
analysis,
balance,
right?
yeah.
AI doesn't have the balancing factor. So what's that going to do? This is why it can make a decision that humans shouldn't exist because, my goal is to create a better world, get rid of greenhouse gases, get rid of whatever. And I will do that no matter what. If I
Yeah,
have to kill humans, I have to wipe out industry. If they have to live, digging in the dirt, that's fine because my goal is X,
yeah.
right? And there's nothing to mitigate that.
That's interesting. These are going to be some good conversations, actually.
So the whole thing of feelings are important, right? We keep talking about feelings are important. Feelings are how we sell. Feelings are how we connect. Feelings are whatever, and that's the one thing that AI doesn't have. And so, is that going to kill us, or are we going to find a way around it?
Do not know. Don't know. I think we're in a competition. Is AI going to kill us or are we going to kill ourselves? I don't know.
I don't think we'll kill ourselves. We've run up against the brink with nuclear weapons and other things, and I think we'll always find a way around it if it's just us.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay. All right.
Anyway, so we'll figure out who we want to talk to, and see if we can set up a time when we can get together with them for next time.
So I want to talk to anybody as long as they're interesting and pretty much just about any time. I can, as long as I know a few days ahead of time, I can pretty much block out any time.
Well, do you want to bring on your friend who understood was it public policy and stuff?
Yeah, that's Trevor. He works. Yeah, I'll shoot him a text or whatever like that. Um, but I'd say yeah, that would be fun. That'd be really good. But I'd say if we can bring Jamar, at this point I don't care. Let's just bring on a guest. Let's see what happens. I'm curious to see what will happen to the dynamics. It'd be kind of interesting.
I think everyone is comfortable enough in themselves and with us to be
Yeah,
honest and be able to push back.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's really good. All right, Chris. With that, I'm going to hit the stop button.